I am Adam Lundy, co-host of They Live by Film, a podcast dedicated to bringing you film discussion and interviews from around the world. Every week, my co-hosts Chris Haskell, Zach Bryant and I discuss a wide range of films, from monumental classics like Vertigo and The Rules of the Game, to the craziest, schlockiest movies ever made like Deathbed and everything in between. We are also lucky enough to have sat down with some of the biggest players in the boutique Blu-ray and film restoration game. If this is your thing, then come hang out with us every Thursday at 7 PM Eastern, wherever you normally stream your podcasts, and now as part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hello there, and welcome back to The Disconnected, here with Brandon Bentley, who is involved with a ton of the martial arts releases that I've been appreciating over the last couple of years. Brandon, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
The main focus that we're going to get to in just a little bit is this masterpiece, the Bruce Lee: A Golden Harvest 4K box set from Arrow. But first, we got to find out who Brandon is. How did you get to this place? How are you invested in all of this now?
So it's funny. I feel like I always go back to the same story about how I kind of fell into it probably in, I think it was late 2012, if I'm not mistaken, with Shout Factory, when, ironically enough, they were working on their first Bruce Lee box set. And I think the whole thing stemmed from them kind of reaching out on the Blu-ray.com forums if there's anybody who's sort of knowledgeable in the films and the different audio tracks, different cuts. And I kind of just went, I can help. And it kind of just snowballed from there. And it's funny because with Shout Factory, I, of course, helped with the first box set, and then they did the individual releases after the new 4K restorations were done. And when I say new 4K restorations, I mean new at the time, like the very first 4K restorations from La Magie Ritrovata. And so they reached back out to me at that time in 2016, 2017, saying, hey, we still have the rights to these movies for a little bit. We can actually do stuff with the new 4K restorations. Can you help again? I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. And the funny thing is, that's actually how I did my first audio commentary, the very first one I did for The Big Boss, which more people heard down the road for Criterion. But the funny thing is, I feel like between the first Shout Factory box set and then the individual releases, I did like nothing. So like I was just like on the sidelines. And then I think, funny enough, after the individual Shout releases, I want to say it was around 2018 that the UK releases were starting to kind of like boil over. I think one of the first ones I remember was, the first two were Drunken Master and Iron Monkey, both with Eureka. And then 88 Films was starting to creep along as well. And I started to like hear bits and bobs behind the scenes. Then eventually I started getting pulled into those slowly but surely. And then, of course, the Criterion Bruce Lee set in 2020. And then Everything Everywhere seemingly all at once with all the companies, like from 2020 onward, especially with 88 Films and Eureka, and then, going back to Shout Factory and, things like that. So, yeah, it really just came down to me kind of, stepping up in the forums and saying, hey, I might be able to help with this. And then it kind of just stuck. So here we are a decade later. I'm still doing this, over a decade later, really.
It's kind of crazy to think back from 2012 to literally that second time, like 2017. It's not just that you weren't doing much. Physical media really wasn't respecting martial arts that much for a while.
True. To be fair, I feel like that was a combination of things. Because the funny thing is, I feel like the Shaw Brothers films were kind of sitting on the sidelines, strangely enough, despite the fact that a lot of these HD masters that have come out were based on restorations done as far back as like 2005 with some of the copyrights I've seen. I mean, granted, I will say the outlier has been Arrow, because Arrow is probably the only company that's actually done new restorations of some of the Shaw Brothers films, depending on what elements they could find, which is why, we've seen less of the frame cuts with the films that we previously saw with films like King Boxer, Boxer from Shantung, films that were literally cut by like 4 to 5 minutes just from frame cuts. So they would go back and restore these movies, or in the case of something like Chinatown Kid, where it was a completely different cut of the film, and they went back and got that scanned. So Arrow is one of the few that's actually done new restorations, new scans of these films. But the HD masters that are on most of these other box sets, and even in like half of the Arrow, like half of each Arrow set still uses those HD masters. If I feel like the frame cuts aren't as bad, like if it's under a minute, it's like that I think that'll be fine if it's like 4
Right.
or 5 or so minutes. So it's kind of weird that the Shaw Brothers films weren't getting more of that love as well. Nowadays, here in the U.S., it's like there's so many. Shouts had 4 box sets, Arrows had 2, and then all the individual 88 Films releases. So like that suddenly blew up. But with Fortune Star, the interesting thing there, I feel like part of the reason why we hadn't seen more of the Golden Harvest films until recently is because there was that weird thing where, for some bizarre reason that to this day I still can't get a straight answer on, so many of them were just upscaled when they were on Blu-ray. Like, even the Bruce Lee films, weirdly enough, the first Hong Kong Blu-rays were true HD except for Game of Death. That was the weird outlier. I guess they realized, it's not really a Bruce Lee film. We don't need to worry about that. And then with Cow Factory, there was a hiccup where Fortune Star sent the wrong masters, and they were the upscales. And so that whole thing, I had to like swoop in and go, guys, you cannot put this out. These are upscales. Right. And I actually showed evidence from my own Hong Kong Blu-ray of The Big Boss. Like, look, these aren't the same. And so I think that was part of the reason why, like, a lot of the U.S. companies were like, a lot of people were saying these are upscales. I don't know if we want to mess with that, but some would still speak out. For example, like the Media Blasters Blu-ray Story of Ricky, which was an upscale and not even from a good SD source. Like, for some reason, Story of Ricky was one of those ones where the SD master just didn't look good. Like, it was not a good restoration. It was one of those weird, like, because typically, like, the SD restoration still looks good. Like, for example, one of the better looking ones outside the Bruce Lee films was One Arm Boxer. Like, I feel like every release has had great colors, pretty clean. But yeah, Story of Ricky, despite being from 1991, that was a rough standard def master that they had. The colors were very washed out, very almost sepia tone, very contrasty, very flickery, which is weird because when you look at the Media Asia restoration that was on the Hong Kong Legends DVD, that looked great. A little soft, but for a DVD, it didn't look bad. The colors were perfect. And then the Fortune Star version at the time seemed like a step back. And so I feel like, ironically enough, the first inklings of Blu-ray companies taking another shot at these was when Story of Ricky was being re-restored in true HD. Yep. And it was actually the media... keep switching between Media Asia and medium rare. My brain has not had enough caffeine today. It was a medium rare Blu-ray of Story of Ricky where we were going, oh, wait, they're actually properly restoring these now in true HD. Granted, that got a better release down the line from 88 Films, but I digress. But I think that was part of the reason why a lot of the Western companies were a little skittish, because it wasn't really until, ironically enough, the L'Imagine Retrovata Asia, when they could start doing the film scans locally, that Fortune Star was putting more of an effort into that. Because I do want to clear something up, because I feel like a lot of people, when they see the phrase L'Imagine Retrovata, they go, oh my God, it's going to be screwed up. Oh, everyone's going to be all,
yellow.
sunbirds, and the skies are going to be like piss green. It's like, here's the thing. People read that phrase, they read that company name, and they don't read all the specifics. Because the thing is, those color grades came down to the branch in Italy. And the thing is, they would be scanned in the Asian branch, and then they would be color graded in the Italian branch. And that's typically where that mismatch would happen. So if I've read that a film's been scanned by them and maybe even like cleaned up, I'm happy. And then typically you'll read, oh, the color grade's been done by this lab, this company. And because I think it's become more common at this point to realize, okay, they're doing the scanning, this other company's doing the color grade, we're good. Because, going to the Bruce Lee box set with Arrow, those were based on the older 4K scans, but they had new restoration work done on those scans. Because you can have an old scan, but a new restoration, it could look miles different. It could look like you started from scratch, but you really didn't. Like, if the scan itself is great, we're good. And one thing people don't realize is, even though a lot of those 2K restorations, not all, but a lot, are actually based on 4K scans. So that's why even with those 2K restorations, they still are pretty sharp, considering the fact that they're not 4K restorations. In fact, I remember with Hapkido, which thankfully is one of the ones that's had both US and UK releases. That was actually one of the weird ones where if you pop in the disc, depending on if you have a region-free player, it'll either give you Arrow or Eureka logos, because that's what actually a deal. But the interesting thing about that one is that one was another 4K scan, 2K restoration. And I was being annoying because I said, look, I want to, reconstruct some of the international versions of the opening credit scenes. Do we actually have access to the opening sequence without the credits, because of course the original Hong Kong version has those rectangles in the sides with little drawings of the actors, which is cool. But when you watch the original export opening, that's not what they did. The Lady Kung Fu version when it was released in the U.S. And so I actually managed to get a hold of the scan of the opening sequence, and it was in 4K. And that was when it kind of like further confirmed that, like, no, these really are 4K scans for 2K restorations. So it's kind of surreal, like actually seeing the raw scan and then trying to clean it up in my own rudimentary way. I don't exactly have all the software and even hardware that these people have to do proper restoration. So I was kind of like sweating over that. So if you look hard enough, you'll still see some minor bits of dirt and debris popping up. But considering what I had to work with, it was like that guy, the doctor doing the plastic surgery on the Joker in the '89 Batman. Like, you'll see what I have to work with here. Like, that's how I feel when I try to do my stuff sometimes. But yeah, I think a lot of the reasons why all these companies are swooping in now to kind of go back and backpedal from all the tangents I went into. This is why I need scripts for commentaries, by the way. Otherwise, I'll just be like talking an hour ahead of the movie when we're still in the first 15 minutes. But no, I think that's the big reason why so many companies are like snatching up all these Hong Kong films, is because film restoration's becoming, easier, more affordable, within Hong Kong. So they don't have to worry about shipping off, original camera negatives to, Canada or something. I heard rumors that those first HD masters of the Bruce Lee films, or at least Big Boss Fist Fury and Way of the Dragon,
right?
Allegedly, they were shipping off, original camera negatives to Canada and then hoping that they would come back. Like, I don't know how true that was, or if it was just like a really good inner positive. Either way, it's like, I can see why they're skittish about doing that with their entire library, but they knew that with the Bruce Lee films, it was one of those risk to reward ratio scenarios where it's like, hey, we'll make a lot of money because it's Bruce Lee. Like, that's why for decades, like, his films have always been the ones like released over and over and over again. And literally just here in the US, like, they've been on every format except ironically 4K so far. But yeah, I do think that that's the main reason why everyone's kind of like jumping in, because I think aside from, restorations being more accessible, I think they're just seeing the success that these other companies are having. I mean, it's even getting to the point where UK-based companies are now kind of getting their foothold here in the US too, mainly thanks to MVD, because MVD's put out stuff for, 88 Films for a few years. Now Eureka's jumped on board and they've put out their first few US releases. I think the first one being Black Mask, which I did not work on. There's been some discussions about Black Mask online. I did not work on that one. I would have liked to have worked on that one, but I did not work on that one. So, but once again, tangents. So I should probably let you take it from there. But long story short, restoration is becoming more accessible in Hong Kong, and more companies want to get in on that bandwagon.
This show is a show about tangents, so I totally get it. There's multiple things I want to follow through on that. One of the other things I've heard that's been sort of leading to more of these robust editions, especially in the US, is I don't know what the best way to put this is, but like more trustworthy relationships. Just people are finally making some of those connections that before had not solidly been in place. And the last 5 or 6 years, everybody's just a little more willing to share, it feels like.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, there's still some hiccups here and there. Can't really go into all the details. I will say that with all these films that we work on, we quickly learn like all these different licensors out there, because obviously the big two, ironically enough, much like the studios that they got the films from, are Fortune Star and Celestial. Golden Harvest, primarily Golden Harvest, I should say, and Shaw Brothers. Because with Fortune Star, you knee-jerk think Golden Harvest, but it's also, DMB Films, Low-Way Productions. They kind of like snatched up a bunch in there. But for the most part, Golden Harvest. And there are other companies that, some of the distributors have licensed from, like Golden Sun, who've given us Island of Fire, the upcoming Island of Fire, Holy Virgin versus the Evil Dead. And the thing is, with companies like Fortune Star and Celestial, they've been really forthcoming with the distributors going, hey, by chance, do you have access to these film elements so we can try this thing? Like, oh, yeah, sure. Like I said, with Arrow and Chinatown Kid, Celestial managed to unearth, I think it was either inner positive or inner negative of the export cut, which is why you have the English titles at the beginning. That's essentially the uncut version of the film, because they managed to find that Cantonese Mandarin hybrid, which I didn't even know was what the Chinese language track was for the film. It's actually meant to be Cantonese and Mandarin, because you have characters speaking different dialects, which was kind of unusual at the time. Typically, it was either Cantonese, Mandarin, dub the rest. But since it was more of a plot point, you had both dialects on there, which I thought was pretty cool. Fortune Star, funny enough, I feel like I've seen the most growth with Fortune Star because there was a time where, like I would say around 2018, it was typically like what you got was what you got. Like there were great restorations, but like, oh, do you have these film elements? No, you get this and you're done. Like, okay, fair enough. Can we put this version of the film if we have these film elements? No, it needs to be this version. Like, all right, fine. To be fair, there's been times over the years where we understand why they're a certain way. Like you can't have, for example, the Japanese cut of Police Story on there, not because, oh, it's a different cut, but because you literally have Japanese side titles on there, and Japanese is not one of the languages that's licensed, which most people might not get, but that basically is taking a chunk out of another potential market that they could license. So, like, if Japan wants to license it, they'll go, oh, well, we don't want to license it now because people can just import, this release because it has Japanese side titles on the film. Because at the time I didn't understand that, but then the more I thought about it, the more I realized, okay, that's fair. I can kind of see where that's an issue. And the other tricky thing is that you don't always know what film elements you can actually get directly from Fortune Star. Like, if they had the Japanese scenes from Police Story without, the Japanese side titles on, the master, we'd be good to go. But, at last I heard, I don't think they actually had access to that. But then again, you get lucky every once in a blue moon, and then suddenly, oh, we found the original theatrical print of The Big Boss. So, which, that's a whole other story for down the road. But then there are tricky things like, I'm probably not going to get too detailed with this because I was pulling my hair out. With Island of Fire, a lot of people have been asking about the Taiwanese version. All I'm going to say is the footage should still be on the disc, but there was a lot more red tape than we anticipated. So it's usually a case of if we coulda, we woulda, but we can't, so we won't. Once again, probably shouldn't say too much about that, but efforts were definitely made. A lot of efforts were made, but it will still be archived in some capacity on the disc. Same thing with Holy Virgin versus Evil Dead. We had some troubles with that one. I kind of I want to thank Kung Fu Bob for this. He was the one who reached out to me directly going, hey, dude, they got the HD master of the film. It's a category 2 version of the movie. Help. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, well, the Cat 3 version has been on like various formats. So you think you can kind of work your magic and reconstruct it. And it's like, I'll see what I can do, because I admit I had actually never seen the film. I'd heard of the movie. You knew I had Donnie Yen. It was a Cat 3 film. Never seen it. So whenever I'm kind of brought into a project of a film that I'd never seen before, that, at the very least I've heard of, I kind of start going down all the rabbit holes. And I wouldn't say I've become an expert by the end, but I know a lot more about the movie than I did beforehand. And also I do like a very basic, like lining up the two cuts to see like where there are differences. And also checking the audio sources, because there's also a difference in the audio sometimes. Even if it's the same dialect, you might have different music, different sound effects.
Oh, yeah.
And you're trying your best to make sure it's authentic as possible. And that was sadly another case where it's like we wanted original film elements, and they're like, there are times where it's like they might not know, or, a lot of variables come into play. So that one, thankfully, we didn't really have red tape issues. It's just more film element issues. So I did my best to clean that one up as much as I could, place it where I could. So it's almost like a Big Boss Mandarin cut scenario, just not as fancy, but it's more of like a preservation of the Cat 3 version of the film. Right. To give like the best possible presentation of that cut for now, until by some slim chance down the road those proper film elements can be found. And that's the thing, like I said, depending on the licensor, sometimes you can get all this extra footage. Some of the companies put in more of an effort to scan extra stuff, like with Iceman Cometh. That was another one that kind of surprised us, where on a long shot we asked, like, hey, do you have all these extra scenes? Like, we actually sent them like a VHS bootleg of the Taiwanese version of the film, just so they can double check to have something to look off of. And they're like, let us look. And I had no hopes on that. And next thing I know, they sent over raw scans of these clips. Wow. And I said, oh, okay. Because they had a longer version, but it wasn't that version. It was really weird. Like, it was somewhere in between. So we basically used that slightly longer version as a base. And then we started dropping in all the stuff that was missing. And on top of that, we basically got an additional extra feature out of that, because there were some special effects shots that had no effects. So I thought, all right, well, that's kind of cool. We can kind of toss these in as another bonus. Yeah. Where, hey, see like before and after shots. So yeah, like when it comes to getting film elements from these companies, it can be hit or miss. But going back to what you were saying about the trustworthiness, it is a two-way street. Whether
Yeah.
we can trust that we can get the best elements from certain companies, and if they can trust in us to put out the best possible product. And that's the thing. I think there's been a lot of camaraderie, with Eureka, 88 Films, Shout, and all them. With Fortune Star, with Celestial. And yeah, I think that's been helping putting out a better product.
One thing that I think we probably should dive into is so many, I guess, fan problems with these releases tend to be around the alternate cuts. Now, this is going to be two questions baked into one because it's going to serve each other, I promise. One is, how have you become so knowledgeable on all the different types of cuts? And with that, can you also explain why it's difficult to license different cuts, why that's a problem for some of these releases without getting, into the politics of it?
Without getting into the barbed wire of it.
Yeah.
So the funny thing is, with the multiple cuts, I'm actually working on a project right now that has not been announced yet that is similar to that. And I'm trying to make sure I get everything in the clear. I really want to talk about it, but I can't talk about it yet. But with other films, there are some where those alternate cuts are like very well publicized. Like, oh, this has been missing this version for so many years. Like one of the more obvious ones was like New Fist of Fury. That was a weird one where it seemed like every Fortune Star release was just the 80-ish minute cut of the film. It was so weird. Like when that first, I think it was the Hong Kong Legends DVD. That was the first time we were even aware of that Cantonese re-release. Like unless you were a hardcore fan who had the Japanese Laserdisc, you probably didn't know that cut even existed. Because I remember I first saw that on VHS and the Columbia TriStar DVD, and it was the usual 2-hour version. So some of those are a little more obvious. Some you got to do a little more digging, like on moviecensorship.com, the English version of, I'm going to pronounce it woefully incorrectly, Stinkbericht, the German movie cut comparison website. But moviecensorship.com has become like more frequently updated version. And I remember they had like a whole long, cavalcade of comparisons for Iceman Cometh. So that's when I knew I had to start researching. The film right now that I'm working on, without giving too many clues, it's one that has typically been known for having a shorter cut in most of its releases. But people are like, oh, well, this version had, 15 or 20 minutes more footage. And there's another version released in this country that had that much footage on that video format. And so that's when you start asking, all right, what do we have access to? Right. I think a lot of it also comes down to what countries released these versions and who actually had the rights to what, especially if multiple countries might have been involved in the making of that film. That's when things get a little trickier. Like even something as more simplistic as the U.S. cuts of certain movies. Like in some cases, you can pull it off, like Super Cop. Like we have the uncut Hong Kong Police Story 3, but we also have the U.S. cut as a bonus. But then when Shout wanted to do Iron Monkey, they wanted to have both cuts on there. And for some reason, I think it was Paramount who went, no. Don't know why. Don't know why Police Story 3 was fine, but Iron Monkey wasn't. Don't know if it's because it had involvement from Quentin Tarantino and he needed to write it. I don't know. It's one of those weird things where it's like, you think everything is in the clear, and then suddenly out of left field, something just swoops in and punches you in the face. Like even now, this is one film, like a little more of a tangent here because it's not a Hong Kong movie, and it's one I've never even seen, but I've heard of. George A. Romero's Martin. There was a lot of hubbub recently with, I think it's Second Sight, who's been working on a new restored version, that they found like additional film elements for deleted footage or missing scenes. And apparently the one who actually had those film elements went, no. Don't know if it was a legal thing. Don't know if it was like a pride thing. Like, oh, this is mine and nobody can have it, which is what a lot of us were concerned about would be the case with the Big Boss someday, that we would finally find the footage and it would be a hardcore fan like, no, mine, I have to have this over you. And then luckily enough, it was just, a film print sitting in the Hong Kong Film Archives. But, sometimes it is those fans that are a little too hardcore that make things difficult. But it is, whether or not it's a person or a company who wants to have those film elements worked on, or if there's a producer of a certain, territory of a film, like if it's a Hong Kong Taiwanese co-production, there might be some hiccups there. Like, oh, well, you got the Hong Kong rights, you didn't get the Taiwanese rights for this version of the movie, and since we co-produced, you can't do that. And then, of course, there's weird things where you're willing to license things from somebody who might have the licensing rights,
Right.
and they just don't want to do anything with it. I'm not saying that that would answer all the people asking for the John Woo films, but that kind of is the reason why no one's done the John Woo films. Like, even Woo himself came out and said, yeah, even I can't do anything. So if the director of these films like, yeah, then, it's one of those things where it's like all the hands are tied. And that's the thing. Like, there's so many times where there's things that we want on these releases. And, we're willing to put in the time, the effort, the legalese, the money. And for one reason or another, there's just going to be a brick wall that will come up at some point or another and just stops it. And the thing is, some fans get that, some don't. Some are like, oh, well, you're not having this thing on this release, I'm not going to buy it. I'm like, really? Like, in some cases, I get it. Like, I'm not going to say an argument, but there's been a little bit of pushback over the fact that the upcoming 4K Fist of Legend does not have an English dub.
Right.
Not sure how much I should say, but basically, once again, we want the dub on there, but there were certain elements basically saying we can't do that for one reason or another. I think some of the theories are correct, some of them are not. One person actually made a good point on Twitter, and it kind of made me wish I thought of this sooner because it probably would have played in our favor, is like if someone's dyslexic and they would like to watch a subtitle, but it's a little more difficult that way, an English dub would actually help in that sense. Yeah. So I kind of wish we had said something like that, and maybe it would have worked in our favor a little more, like, oh, you're right, yeah, we can get a dub on there. But there were a few factors that kind of interfered with trying to get the dub on there. And, typically with these films, an English dub is one of the requisites that we strive for. Not only that, but with a lot of these films, we also try our best to get the original English dubs, unless, for one reason or another, Drunken Master, it can't be done. Like, I wasn't involved with Drunken Master. That was slightly before I got to work on the UK discs. But that was another one where allegedly there was like legal licensing issues that prevented having the original old school dub and then only the 80s version of the dub with, I forgot the actor's name, the guy who dubbed Jackie Chan, who also dubbed him in Wheels on Meals and My Lucky Stars and a lot of the 80s stuff. Like, I wouldn't mind having both dubs on there, but, a lot of us grew up with that old school dub that actually was made at the time it came out. And a lot of people also don't realize with Drunken Master, another little side tangent here, the main reason why we even had the 110-minute cut of Drunken Master is because they've mainly used export cut masters, because much like The Big Boss, that was another case of, we need to whittle it down so we can get in more showtimes. Right. But thankfully, that export cut was based on the first cut of the movie, which is why it was so much easier to get the 110-minute version. But that's also why Sony had that hack to pieces Cantonese track where they didn't patch it with Mandarin, they patched it with English. It's like, come on, guys, really? Like, you at least could have had a Chinese dialect to fill in those gaps if you couldn't find the 110-minute Cantonese cut. But no, you put it in English. You started in the English dub. And I remember when I first popped that DVD, and I was like, did they mess this disc up and put on two dubs? And then suddenly it switches to Cantonese in the opening scene with Dean Sheck. I'm like, what? Because at that point, I already had the VHS of the uncut Cantonese version. So I was very confused when I first saw that old DVD of Drunken Master, which, by the way, you buy the Twilight Time Blu-ray of Drunken Master and Snake and Eagle Shadow, it still has that hacked up Cantonese track with English dub in it. And this, I think, was after the Eureka release. I'm like, really? The Cantonese, the uncut Cantonese is so easily accessible at this point, you still couldn't get a hold of it. Really? Okay. So a lot of weird things with stuff like that. And, thankfully, we do our best, because a lot of these Blu-rays are basically done by teams of people where, one person might be more knowledgeable on this film, another person might be more knowledgeable on that film. So a lot of us kind of like try to cull our resources to hunt down whatever we can find with alternate cuts, extended cuts, shorter cuts, and just trying to get the most comprehensive releases of these films possible, where possible. But there's a lot of different variables that come into play as to what we can and can't do. So, like I said, some people understand that, and some people just come out with the proverbial pitchforks and torches and just want to rip us to shreds no matter what we try to do. So I hate to use the phrase, we can't win them all, but there are times where I feel like we can't win them all. And then at the end of the day, I'm just like sitting at my computer trying not to look like, what was it? I think that Dad in Coraline, that gif where he's just sitting there, just typing away, just looking like he's on his last leg. That's how I feel some days. Like working on all these, like, great, I'm done with this thing. And then I start seeing people unhappy about one aspect and saying they're not going to buy it. I'm just like, all right, I did the best I could with what I had to work with. I'm sorry. So, and I have to tell myself, like, it's not just me working on these releases, but I am one of those people that like mentally takes on too much responsibility for some of these titles. And some of them I don't as much, where it's like, oh, I only knew so much about this film and I was working with other people. So it was sort of like an equal thing. And then there are times where I still mentally start taking all the blame, even if I don't have to, which I hate. That's one thing I need to fix about myself. But, it's one of those OCD things, which can be a very double-edged sword. And going back to this one title I'm working on now, once again, I really want to talk about it. I can't talk about it, but it is, another case where I'm trying to get it as perfect as possible with what we've been given to work with. Maybe I'll come back in 2 months. That they might announce it in June. I don't know yet. I won't say which company, so I don't put any pressure on them. But I'm predicting maybe in 2 months it'll be announced, and then I can talk about it. But it's one that honestly surprised me, and one that we have all the film elements, but then some of the text has been a little trickier to work with, and some of the sound elements have been like, oh, so we need to use like all these different formats to complete this one Mandarin track. Fun. It totally won't sound Frankenstein. But thankfully, I've been doing a lot more research on audio restoration as well, because there's been a couple times in the past where we've done the best we can with what audio sources we have, and some people have been a little not too kind about it. Potentially people from other Blu-ray companies who no longer work at those Blu-ray companies and now work at other Blu-ray companies, but I won't name names because I like to think that water's under the bridge at this point, but it's just more of an in-joke at this point. But no, audio is another tricky thing, because sometimes one of the most frustrating things there is when you have like very clear sounding sources and then they've just been remixed to shit. Like you have clear dialogue, clear original sound effects, then you have the new sound effects over top, new like bird and cricket foley and all this other stuff with these remixes. And then you're thinking, okay, well, maybe they still have these original elements, so we can kind of reconstruct the original mono track that matches the original mono theatrical mix. Oh, no, here's an optical rip from a film print for your mono track.
Right.
Okay. It's like, where's my laser disc? Oh, there it is. Because sadly enough, there are times where the laser discs are just cleaner sounding than the optical rips that we get sometimes. So there are a lot of times where we have to resort to laser disc rips for proper theatrical mono in a clearer sound. And thankfully, I've been, like I said, doing a lot more research on audio restoration. Because a lot of times, one example I use is when Celestial used to do their audio restoration of their own, especially their dubs, the English dubs, where they almost sound like they were underwater, because there was noise reduced within an inch of their life, that you just had almost like this watery sound. It's like a very digital sound, because you're trying to get rid of so many different elements. You're trying to get rid of pops, crackles, hums, analog hiss. And so if you just do like all in one, you start to lose the actual like detail in the audio. So I've been doing more research on like trying to carefully eliminate certain things without losing the integrity of the actual original audio. It's kind of like film restoration, because you don't want something DNR'd within an inch of its life, and it's like, oh, you don't see the grains. Like, yeah, you don't see the pores in their faces either. So it's like, I'm looking at you, Ultimate Hunter Edition of Predator. I feel like that's become like the most frequent example to this day. I mean, thankfully that was rectified in the 4K, but now we have the James Cameron 4Ks, and that's a whole other tangent that I'm not going to go into, because that's a whole minefield in and of itself. And that's one thing we try to avoid with these movies. And there have been some instances where, unfortunately, we can be saddled with DNR'd masters, and sometimes we get lucky and we can basically get a master where they're able to kind of just like go back one step, like kind of hit that faux undo button to go back. Like, oh yeah, well, we DNR'd it last, so we'll take that filter out, and here you go, here's a new one. Like there was one title I worked on a while back. It wasn't Forge Star, it wasn't Celestial, it was from another company, and the master they had was a DNR'd one. It was fine, like it was HD, but, you could tell it should have looked better. And luckily enough, this company was like, oh, yeah, no, I think we can do that. They went back and they just, I guess, re-rendered it, took the DNR out. We were good.
Nice.
If more companies could do that, that'd be great. But that's sadly not always the case. Like, sometimes it's a little more extreme. Like, for example, the 88 Films version of Armor of God. Like, that one, they actually basically went back to the raw elements to redo that one, because the 2K master was so DNR'd. And sadly, that's one that they were not able to go back to. So they had to get a new film, either go back to the film scan or do a new film scan. So that's why their version of Armor of God looks so unique when compared to the medium rare version. and even the Shout Factory version, because the Shout Factory version, unfortunately, could only have access to that 2K master,
Right.
which, in most cases would have been good, but that was definitely one of the softer looking ones. Once again, tangents everywhere, but these are all the hurdles that go behind like every project that we work on. Like, okay, do we have this? Do we have that? Do we have this other thing? If we do have this other thing, are we going to have to deal with this, or are we going to be okay with that? It's just like, what do we have? And, or if we'll get like a film that should be in Cantonese and we only get it in Mandarin, or it should be in Mandarin and we only get it in Cantonese, or we get it dub, but it's a newer dub, and we find the export dub, but it only matches the export cut, obviously. Sometimes you find, out of left field, an old school export style dub that matches an uncut Hong Kong version of a film. Rare. It's actually happening with one of the projects I'm working on now, which I'm very happy about. Although, ironically enough, that was the one where we got a complete English dub, but not a complete Mandarin track to go with it. It's like, so many things. Like, all right, with each new one that we get, it's like, all right, damage report. Okay, we're good here. Damage report. Okay, so we need to find all the Mandarin elements for this film. Cool. All right, so that one, we have like 80 minutes of English for a 100-minute film, things like that. So it's just like, what do we do? Like, do we do an export cut? Do we do a hybrid dub where it's the old dub with a little bit of the new dub? Do we even have a new dub? Like, there's some that I've worked on, Once in a Blue Moon, where there's just literally no dub at all, old or new. And so it's just, I won't say we let the chips fall where they may. We see where the chips fall, and then we see how we can actually rearrange the chips. So,
and timing becomes a problem on these too. Like I've been on a couple of these releases that we've been working on, and you'll be 75% done after figuring out what you're going to include, and then somebody goes, "Oh wait, hold on, we have this." And it's like, "Oh, that changes everything." And
where were you?
We were supposed to announce in 3 weeks. Thanks.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing too. I've seen so many people kind of give 88 Films a hard time when they delay something. And yeah, there was like the whole thing where, I'm not going to bring up drama, but I left there for a while. I kind of call it more of a hiatus at this point. Because that was like a whole other thing. But then after time, I feel like my first big project back there was Holy Virgin versus Evil Dead. Once again, you can thank Kung Fu Bob for that. But with 88 Films, there are times where they'll delay something. It's not just because like, oh no, we're just running behind on things. Like, no, there's usually really good reasons for it. Like with Project A, there's been teasers online that, they found film elements for things that have been bonus features in the past, but typically only in standard def. Like the Chinese New Year promo with Jackie Chan, which, was sort of in like a gummy looking SD version taken from a digibeta from like 20 years ago. But now they actually have it scanned on film. They actually managed to find those film elements, and it looks great. It looks gorgeous. Definitely worth the wait, in my opinion. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why, and rather than just going like, oh, it's too late, whatever. With any of these releases, we try to like compromise where we can to get as much as we can on there. And then there are times where it could be like months after it's already been released, and somebody's like, oh, hey, I found this thing. Yay! And then you have to figure out another way to get it out to the public.
Right.
Like there's actually a bonus on To Kill with Intrigue that involves stuff involving Killer Meteors, because it was like probably a year after Killer Meteors came out where it's like, oh, hey, here's this Korean version. Thanks for stepping up. But to be fair, it's also one of those tricky things where you want to like do an APB basically going in, like, hey, if anybody has, any of these things for this movie, come help. And then that kind of reveals to everybody, oh, so you're working on this movie before it's been announced. And then everybody starts hounding the company like, oh, when's it coming out? When's it coming out? When's it coming out? So it's a very double-edged sword. It's like you want to get as much help as you can, but a lot of times it's really just coming down to people like myself who are already allowed to be in the know without giving anything away. Like I might give some like coy teasers of things online, but usually it's enough to make people go, what? Like maybe he's talking about this thing. Like I never try to be blatantly obvious. Although I think Frank Jang has kind of taken my, I've said too much Ron Swanson gif. I did that one time. He kind of took that and ran with it.
I was about to say, if you want blatantly obvious, follow Frank Jang on Instagram.
Yeah, so I'll like reply to him using another Ron Swanson gif. Usually it's just like the glare, like, don't, Frank, don't. But yeah, it's so funny. Like even with the Bruce Lee set, I have to basically give a huge thanks to James Flower for trusting me to have access to what I did for almost a year before it came out. Actually, I would say over a year in some cases, because with the Game of Death footage, I had all the footage. Like literally, he sent me, I think it was the interpositives or the scans of the interpositives to kind of review, because he wanted my help on the outline for Final Game of Death, and also just doing the edit as well. Because basically, I joke with people about the fact that I got an editing credit with him, not a co-editing credit or assistant editor credit, which I feel like would have been more accurate. I feel like I got too much credit on that one. It's like, no, it was more of an assistant editor, because he already edited like a pretty complete version back in April of 2022. And so he sent that to me. He sent me the files. And so I was doing my own edits as well, like kind of like moving things around just a little bit, not much, but just enough to like tighten things up, either, make things shorter, make things a little longer, maybe swap a take here and there. So it was really more just going through what he already edited. I'm a very self-deprecating individual. I only take so much credit where it is. So in that case, they kind of need to give me everything. And I was kind of surprised that like nothing was watermarked. I'm like, really? Like that's a lot of trust in me. But funny enough, when he sent me the Big Boss footage, I think I showed on Twitter the watermark that he put on this, because it was the Digibeta version at the time, because that's all they had access to at first. And so he sent me the Digibeta file, but it just had my name and like 50% opacity over the entire frame. So I was like, I wonder who sent this. So just to make sure I wouldn't do anything, probably because he knew that of all the Bruce Lee films, the Big Boss was my favorite. So he was probably a little more concerned that I might say something about that versus, the log scene from Game of Death. It's like, I don't know, log scene's kind of up there with the missing Big Boss footage, but it is what it is. Like, I certainly don't blame him, but yeah, I didn't get to see like the actual film scan stuff until we got closer to the actual release, and probably not until I worked on the not quite biggest boss, because we needed like the higher quality footage to work off of. So yeah, the first time I watched it, it was so funny. It was one of those things where for decades I always wondered, like, if I ever got to see the longer or any of the longer cuts of the Big Boss, what was it going to be like? Am I going to watch it like in a theater? Am I going to watch it like in the living room on a nice, HD TV? It's like, no, I watched it sitting here on the computer on this monitor with standard Digibeta name plastered to the screen. I thought I was just going to watch a little bit. I just watched the whole damn movie in one sitting. I'm like, oh, well, there it is. I just watched the whole thing just sitting on the computer. Because it's one of those things, like, you always like imagine certain things in your head. And I'm like, oh, it was a little anticlimactic how it turned out. But and the other thing is that I saw so many people in the UK getting to see it in theaters. I'm like, yeah, we can't do that here in the US, sadly, because unless Janus Films / Criterion and Arrow Films can work out something, here in the US, you don't really have that option. And ironically enough, last August, I did see the Big Boss in theaters, but it was the Cantonese version. So, everybody in the UK is watching the Mandarin cut, and I'm watching, the Cantonese version of the Big Boss, complete with the Pink Floyd music, though. I'll say that much. So I saw people in the theater kind of like bobbing their head to Pink Floyd's Time from Dark Side of the Moon. But yeah, so it's just all the things, basically. So
with us now going into that in this discussion, let's talk about this, because I don't even know how to start this discussion. Like, this is kind of a miracle box set, and there's a lot of people that don't understand the gravity of that, especially people that are, let's assume for this next portion, people have never seen a BruceLee film. So why is this a miracle box set, and why is this literally, like, in my opinion, I know you're involved, so it would be biased. I'm saying it. I think this is one of the most important physical media box sets possibly of all time, just for the amount of like comprehensiveness that we have in this. So can you explain why it's that important?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, this is outside of Enter the Dragon for obvious reasons. I feel like this has become like the end all be all Bruce Lee set,
right?
At least in regards to his Golden Harvest output. I do respect the box set being called Bruce Lee at Golden Harvest, because a lot of people, and I've said it as well, like, oh, the Big Boss was his first movie. Technically not true, because we know he was a child star, but a lot of those films, Lord knows what those film elements are like. It'd be great to see, a childhood film box set, but that would be a little trickier, but that's neither here nor there. For the films he's most known for, Big Boss, Fist Fury, Way of the Dragon, Game of Death, this is like the end all be all, like brand new restorations of all those films. literally every bit of footage that Bruce Lee shot for Game of Death. There's still people arguing online, like, oh, well, he shot footage of him fighting the people himself. Like, no, those were publicity photos. Like, he was not suddenly going to be on the island with the pagoda wearing his, bell bottoms and, flared shirt. Because there's literally like flashes where you can see him directing where he's wearing pants, no shirt, but he's wearing those pants. And so, he's just screwing around on the set. Like, oh, they have, still camera. Let's get some shots. So literally every bit of Game of Death footage. Because, going back to like around the turn of the century where you had like Warrior's Journey versus Bruce Lee and G.O.D., we did have that stipulation. Oh, by the way, this doesn't have everything. This has most of the stuff, but it doesn't have everything.
Right.
And we were kind of resigned to that being the end all be all. It's like, look, we're never going to find that extra reel or two of Game of Death footage. It is what it is. The most we got is what survived in Bruce Lee, the Man, the Legend, and a little bit in The Legend, which was basically just ported from Bruce Lee, the Man, the Legend. Well, I take it back. The Legend had the outdoor footage. Bruce Lee, the Man, the Legend did not. But Bruce Lee, the Man, the Legend had a little more of the post-log scene footage. So it was sort of a combination of the two.
Right.
So for them to find this, and the thing is, both this footage and the Big Boss footage was almost just like dumb luck. Like with Game of Death, it came down to James Flowers speaking to people at Retrivada. Once again, another reason why I can't give shit to Retrivada anymore is they're like, oh yeah, no, we have the inner positives of the original Game of Death footage. And then James is like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I don't know if they somehow got access to it when they were trying to restore the 78 Game of Death.
Right.
But it's such a weird coincidence. So when I first heard that, I'm thinking, oh, great, we can actually, reconstruct, either Warrior's Journey or Bruce Lee and G.O.D. in high definition. Like that already would have been a big deal because for, 20 plus years, we were only used to seeing them in standard def. And the most frustrating thing was, especially when I was working on the Criterion set, I was hoping we could have found like the film masters for the Artport version because that played in theaters in Japan. So like, if we could at least scan that, we have something in HD. And then there's like a whole weird conspiracy about the people who used to run Artport. Now they're like in real estate and nobody knows what happened to those film elements. I'm just like, don't get involved with film if you're going to do shit like this, please. Just for the love of God, stop.
Yeah.
So I was already excited about that. But then when I heard that this was all of the footage, full log scene, outdoor footage, I'm thinking, you've got to be shitting me. Because that was back in like March or April of 2022 when James first gave me the heads up on that. I'm thinking, this is amazing. Like that alone would have been like a huge reason to get this set. And then we come into, summertime or early June, and that's when James mentioned The Big Boss. And anybody who knows anything about The Big Boss knows that there were longer cuts of the film. And I honestly thought if it was ever going to be found, it was going to be like a fifth generation VHS pan and scan bootleg with, burned-in subs that are cut off on the sides. Or even cut off at the bottom if they're overzealous with the pan and scan. So the fact they found a widescreen digibeta was kind of shocking. Because then it made me think, like, did it really just come down to asking, hey, do you have a longer Mandarin master somewhere? Right. And then Fortune Star's like, oh, yeah, we do. Here you go. It's just like, really? And then on top of that, finding out that they were able to find the film elements. Because at first we thought, okay, we're probably just going to do a standard def bonus feature with this cut of the film, which would have been great in and of itself. Just seeing this at all. People were going, oh, maybe it's on a VCD. Like they're expecting like a VCD version to have this footage. And, a digibeta is a little better already. It's basically what they would have used to make those like Universal Laser and Megastar DVDs back in the day. So that would have sufficed. So then the fact that they actually went to the Hong Kong Film Archives and, looked around, found the film prints that matched that digibeta down to every bit of missing frames from print damage was just stunning. And that's the thing, like, this set has stuff that has never been released in any other set prior. Like, the only thing it's been released in since then is actually the individual releases for Arrow. And then apparently, I think the newest Japanese releases licensed them from Arrow. So basically, nothing prior to that Arrow set had any of this. And it still hasn't been released in the US. I don't even know if that's going to be a thing anytime soon. Either Criterion's going to have to do a new 4K set or let the right slaps and then Arrow swoops in. Like I feel like it's going to be one of those two scenarios. I don't know when. I don't know who. I've worked with both companies. I got nothing. So, like, that's the next thing I'm hoping for. Because, like I said at the beginning of this, the Bruce Lee films have been on, like, virtually every pre-4K format here in the U.S. Like, from beta through Blu-ray, they've been on everything. Like, I have there's actually even like CEDs of some of the Bruce Lee films. Like Game of Death and Enter the Dragon had CEDs. I don't know if any of the other ones did. It's just a random 2 Bruce Lee movies, like those 2, but not the other 3. Sure. But yeah, all been on Laserdisc, DVD, no VCD in the US, obviously. I actually talked to my boss, who's actually from the Philippines. And when I mentioned VCD, his face kind of lit up because I guess he didn't expect anybody in the US to know what a VCD was. But, film nerds like you and I who are into Hong Kong movies, we are very well aware of what VCDs are. Like the closest we ever got here in the US, I think we were like what they call movie CDs, which they only did like 5 of them. It was like Mortal Kombat, Dragon Fist, and the Clones of Bruce Lee, and maybe a few other things. It was just a random selection I remember seeing at Electronics Boutique as a kid. Like movie CDs, like you mean video CDs? Like no, these are movie CDs. Like it sounds like a VCD. I've joked with people the only thing I don't have the big boss on at this point is film, which is sad. Like I almost threw $700 at a 35 millimeter print on eBay, and I missed it. So I'm kind of sad because what I probably could have done, because I don't live too far from DC, I could have probably gone to the AFI Silver in Silver Spring, Maryland, and went like, "Hey, I have the film reels for the big boss. It's called Fists of Fury, but I know you all don't care. Right. Protect these." And I'll give an introduction at the beginning. Because even though a lot of what they play there are DCPs, they still have all the film function there too. Like they do a lot of 70 millimeter stuff there too, but they also can do 35, 60 millimeter. Yep. I actually saw a 35 millimeter print of, it's ironic that a Bruce Lee fan would be saying this, but I saw a 35 millimeter print of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood there. Those who know, you know why I said what I said. Just ignore that scene. The rest of the film's fine. But I digress.
It's all a fantasy film anyways.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. That's the loophole. I mean, with this set, like with any set, I think there's probably still a few things that we probably could have tweaked a little more. Right. But that's just my OCD. I honestly feel like, aside from just those few minor things, this is basically the end-all, be-all when it comes to the Bruce Lee films. I mean, would have been great if we had Enter the Dragon in 4K on there, sure. But obviously, Warner Brothers was doing their thing for their centennial, and Enter the Dragon's 50th anniversary, that we knew that Warner Brothers was going to be like, no, you can have this Blu-ray from 10 years ago. That's basically what they did. And, it was better than nothing. It was almost like a glorified bonus feature. It's like, oh, hey, you still get Enter the Dragon with this.
It's sadly super obnoxious, too, when that one title sticks out like a sore thumb.
Warner Brothers needs to get their logo in there at all times. That's fair. That's totally fair. I mean, I feel like that's one of the few ways that if it did get a U.S. release, you could improve upon it. Like, all right, give Warner Brothers a few years to sell their version on 4K, and then if Arrow can get the U.S. rights, then they can do their own version of Enter the Dragon, much like what Criterion did with their Blu-ray of Enter the Dragon. Right. Because at the time, Warner Brothers already had Enter the Dragon on Blu-ray multiple times. It was actually one of the first films I remember seeing on the format. It was on HD DVD, so let's put it there. Like they did a Blu-ray and an HD DVD back in like 2007, I think. And then they did the second release in 2013, which had that master that none of us really cared for, sort of the washed out colors, kind of overcropped. Neither here nor there. So then Criterion did their own remasters, and that was like 7 years after the fact. So it's not impossible, but once again, I legit don't know of any other plans that Arrow or Criterion might have in the US. I am completely out of the loop. But it'd be weird with all the other formats that the Bruce Lee films have been on in the U.S. that we wouldn't get a 4K at some point outside of Enter the Dragon. Right. But that's just me. That's the fan talking rather than the guy who's worked on multiple Bruce Lee sets. So, and that was the funny thing about the Arrow set too. That was actually the first UK release of the Bruce Lee films that I worked on, because it was shot in Criterion here in the U.S. But then in the UK, prior to the Arrow set, I think all you had was the medium rare release, which. Right. Like I read a little bit about, but apparently it was just kind of like, I don't want to say underbaked, but from what I read, it's fine. Like
sadly, most of their releases were like that.
Yeah, I mean they're never going to work with me anyway, so I'll just say that if it's not well done, it must have been medium rare. So I'll throw a bit of shade there. I don't even know if they release anything anymore. I could be wrong. I would have loved to work with them back in the day, but as far as I've read, they weren't very collaborative, which is unfortunate because I got their Story of Ricky Blu-ray because it was, at the time, like the best release of the film. But it also had its own share of issues because, for example, they took the 24 frame per second master and re-rendered it to 23.976 frames per second without adjusting the time. And I found this out the hard way because I want to like sync up the Cantonese monitor from the Laserdisc, and it wasn't syncing properly. I'm like, what the hell's going on? And then that's when I checked some of the other versions I had and noticed that there'd be the occasional frame jump. And I went, wait a minute. And then that's when it dawned on me that they didn't shift the frame rate correctly, because and I've actually dealt with that directly too, because 24 versus 23.976 sounds so insignificant. And it really just comes down to the analog frame rate in the theaters versus, the frequencies on televisions, that they had to change it from 24 to 23.976. It's so ridiculous, it's so minuscule. But for, a feature-length film, it catches up. And it can be bad if you don't know what you're doing. And there have been times where I've had to make audio renderings either for a 24 frame per second master or a 23.976 master, or I'll do one and then find out later on, oh no, it needs to be this. So then I have to go back and then convert it. So there's so many elements that go into these Blu-rays and 4Ks that you need to get just right. And sometimes I've seen Blu-rays where they take the 24 frame per second master and then just put it on the disc as 24 frames per second, which is fine, but not optimal. That can cause other issues. It's just, so yeah, they meant well with that first story of Ricky Blu-ray, but that's one of the things that the 88 Films version fixed, that the aspect ratio, better compression. And so it's just, whenever I work on an updated version of a Blu-ray, I always look to see how is it going to be better than a previous release. I mean, if it's 4K versus Blu-ray, okay, that's for the most part should be pretty self-explanatory. But then there are times where it's like, all right, is it really going to be this much of an upgrade? Oh, okay, so I've noticed this. That's a good sign. So, even some of the re-releases of the Jackie Chan films, 9 times out of 10, they've been new masters in some shape or form.
Right.
And even with the Bruce Lee films, like I said earlier, there were old scans, but new restorations. So, because like I said, if you have a really solid 4K scan to begin with, like a raw scan, no color work, no cleanup, just literally the film scanned in 4K, that's a great base to work off of. And as long as, the hard drives hold up, you're good. So you can do so much with those because you get the full color gamut to work with. You can carefully color correct your elements. And it's funny too, because I got to see the raw scan of all movies, To Kill with Intrigue, because of course that's one of the ones that out of left field is getting a 4K. And I saw the raw elements, and it's really interesting because there were some scenes, mind you, this was the raw scan, that were just completely green, not moldy or anything, just literally whatever film stock they were using, it was literally just green for this scene or that scene. And when you color correct it, you wouldn't know. It looks perfect. But sometimes if you do haphazard color correction, suddenly you end up with shadows that look a slight tinge of red or something like that. It's one of those weird things where it's the color correction is almost there, but then something goes off. Because I know, Rich Rivada, the Italian branch is kind of infamous for having those milky shadows from time to time. Yeah. And sometimes I've actually read that they've used color LUTs. I'm like, oh no, don't do that. Color LUTs are for newer films, and that's usually the decision that the cinematographer and or director makes. Don't make that decision for a film that you had no say on. And I read that, a lot of these movies were printed on this film stock in the 70s and such, so we're just kind of matching that. No. Don't match a theatrical print. Sometimes it works, other times it doesn't. Don't do that. So that's why I feel manual color grading is still the best way to go. There are certain things that you can do sort of automated, but I think the best thing to do is have one foot in each door.
Right.
How it is automated, make sure that your colors look natural, make sure highlights aren't blown out, make sure the shadows aren't crushed. And then also don't crush your shadows, then try to raise them back later on, thus making them look charcoal. So I've seen that too, where it's there's no detail in the shadows, but they've been raised. How do you do that? Don't do that. I've seen some like that in theaters too, where it's why do I feel this was color graded by the Italian branch of Rich Rivada? That's why I want to see The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in theaters. It's actually playing at AFI, I think this month or next month, but I'm pretty sure it's the original color grade from Rich Rivada. I'm good. I'm just gonna stay at home. It's fine. And also, it's not one of the 2 Leone approved cuts of the film, because the original Italian theatrical cut and the U.S. cut were both approved by Sergio Leone. The anniversary cut technically wasn't. That was a scene that added back in one of the additional Tuco scenes. So technically, it's neither of his cuts. It's like Alien. You have 2 director-approved cuts. Don't make a third version.
Yep.
But I digress. Same thing with Blade Runner. There's a lot of movies that have multiple cuts approved by the director, so it's kind of amusing. I guess some of the Low-Way films could be considered that way too. I guess he approved of the 83 and the 120-minute versions of New Fist of Fury. I don't know. So we can't ask him anymore, sadly. But once again, I digress. All the tangents. I'll be here all day.
With the Bruce Lee box, there are just tons of things that you can dive into. Special features on literally every disc. You've got documentaries, you've got commentaries. What all were you able to pour some of this passion in? Because there is so much on this disc, or so much in this set, that it's hard to even like start to break it down.
Yes, you're not wrong. Like, even as a fan, there were things that I didn't even know about until I actually had the disc. Like, oh, I didn't know that was on there. Just because, like, by the time it came out, I was just exhausted. Like, I had to kind of like step back a bit from it. And there's been a lot of times I've worked on stuff, no matter how much I love the film, where like once it's released, I'm just like, I just need to like stop for a bit just so my brain can recharge or focus on the next thing. But with this, I feel like with the Big Boss, well, the funny thing was that the most intimidating thing on my end was doing all the commentaries that I did, because I didn't know until like maybe halfway through that James was going to want me to do like as many commentaries as I could. And so, I mean, I think he kind of like brought that up early on, but I wasn't sure like which ones I was actually going to tackle. I mean, it's like, oh yeah, you can use my Big Boss commentary. It's like, oh yeah, no, you did a great job with that for, Shout Criterion, but we kind of want to do a new one. So we're not just porting over old stuff. So that was the first thing. It's like, okay, how do I revisit a commentary without sounding like I'm just, beating a dead horse? Right. And I thought, all right, well, first of all, I recorded that in a room not too dissimilar to this one on like a lavalier microphone with no sound dampening whatsoever. And I was really just going off of bullet points, and it was organized enough. It was basically just to kind of keep me in line so I wouldn't be going too much into tangents, much like I'm doing right now. But try to be as scene specific as possible. And then, so with this, it's like, all right, well, I'm basically going to script this out and then like be as scene specific as possible. Look for anything I might have made a mistake on previously. Try to be as correct as possible in the new one. Because that's the one thing that's most stressful about commentaries, is that I try to be as accurate as possible, but entertaining at the same time. And no matter how much research you do, you might read the wrong thing somewhere, and then you say the wrong thing, and then someone's going to rip you to shreds. I'm not going to name names. There's one person out there who basically just went to town on me on another release, not the Bruce Lee set, but it was another release where I did a commentary, and this guy basically just made it sound like I killed his dog or something. I'm just like, dude, look, first of all, in most of my commentaries, I try to say stuff like, from what I've heard, from what I've read, allegedly, as far as I know, code for I could be wrong. Like on a lighter note, someone gave me a hard time when I said that Huang Zheng Li was one of the stuntmen in one of the fights in Shaolin Wooden Men. And I'm like, look, I'm going off of what I've read online, and the people saying that's not him. Other people would ask them, okay, then who was it? And they're like, all right, so then, I guess none of us know. It's like,
right.
If you see him without his mustache, yes, he looks a lot different, but that hairstyle matches. The eyes look the same. And I'm like, part of me wants to apologize, and part of me is like, I'm still pretty sure that's actually him. Like, he was doing stuff in the Taiwan area at that time, pre-Drunken Master and Snake in the Equal Shadows, so it's not impossible. But I try to cover all my bases where possible with commentaries. But once in a blue moon, somebody would be like, oh, it's probably a good thing you're not doing these commentaries because, oh my God, that was terrible. I'm like, all right, cool. And, I'm not going to name this person because they've done some stuff.
They don't deserve it.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to stir up drama on here. But that's one of the things that always sits in the back of my mind when I'm trying to do commentaries is I want to be as informative as possible without giving incorrect information. Right. And so you research everything you can, everywhere you can. You try to, give shout outs where you can, like, oh, I know I learned this from this person, so I'm going to, mention that person. So, reworking the Big Boss commentary and then doing a brand new commentary for both Fist of Fury and Way of the Dragon. I'm just like, oh my God, and I was also running out of time at that point too. So those I did have to kind of go back to the bullet point style, but still being informative and trying to, relay as much information as possible, whether it was, certain things about the way things were shot or the music that was, borrowed for certain scenes, the way some of the choreography was. And, I joke with Way the Drag, for example. I'm like, hey, if I'm just rambling too much here, listen to Frank Jang and Michael Worth on their commentary. And then with Game of Death, one of the things that kind of lifted off some of the pressure from that was getting Mike Leader on that one. So he and I kind of, shot the shit back and forth doing that one. So that made things a lot easier there. But one of the other cool things on The Big Boss was getting to do the not quite biggest boss, because when I first watched this longer cut, I was very curious as to what didn't make it. Like, going in, I was prepared for the Saw scene not to be in there. Like, that was just a given. Like, look, from what I've read for years, including from that 1979 Bruce Lee convention print in the UK, the one thing everybody remembered was the Saw scene was not there. But they mentioned all these other scenes, and a lot of those were in there. Some scenes I didn't even know were going to be in there, like the longer first fight with James Tan and the longer introduction to Lee Kun. So that was cool. But then being surprised that, the two cousins being cut up was still, censored, except for, the severed head being tossed in the box. That was both surprising there. And so, just basically getting to discuss what was still missing, because, talking about the deleted Big Boss scenes has been a thing of mine for decades. And the fact that even though we found 10 more minutes, I can still ramble about stuff that's still missing.
Right.
It kind of just adds to that mystery as to what's, not there and what we may or may not be able to find in the future. The one example I always go to is Metropolis, because Metropolis is another film for decades. There's footage missing. And then over the years, they would find more, then more, then more. Like, it took 80 years before they found the most complete version that they could. I don't know if it's still incomplete or not, or if it's right there. So I hold out hope that we could still find more for The Big Boss, but it's going to be even less likely for that footage. So that's one of the things I was really excited to discuss in that set. But on top of that, we have the separate featurette that basically, analyzes the scenes that were found. Then that's what I got to do my mini commentary for that as well. So I basically got to ramble about The Big Boss in 3 different ways on that set. So that was a lot of fun. And then going into Fist of Fury, James is actually the one who had the idea to do the comparison between New Fist of Fury and Fist of Fury Part 2, which was a lot of fun. And we actually had the chance to, that was one of the few how do I put this? One of the few elements that kind of snuck out of the UK and into the US thanks to the US release of New Fist of Fury. Because none of the other extras could really have a reason to be released in the US right now. But that was where it's hey, Arrow has the US only rights to New Fist of Fury, so we're going to put, this extra on there. So in that case, it became more of a matter of comparing New Fist of Fury to Fist of Fury Part 2, with New Fist of Fury being the emphasis in that case. It was kind of fun deep diving back into that, because Fist of Fury Part 2 was one of the first, if not possibly the first, Bruceploitation film I ever saw. I was probably 3 or 4 years old at the time when I saw that, because I was already that young seeing the real Bruce Lee movies. So I think my dad started renting some of those, knowing that it would entertain me, even though it wasn't really Bruce Lee. But even at that age, I'm like, that's not Bruce Lee. But they were still fun. I grew up, renting those tapes from the local mom and pop shop. My weapon of choice was Metro Video. We had a Blockbuster Video starting in 92, but we had Metro Video, Arrow's Video. I got to thank those two for being my introduction to Bruceploitation, the Low Way era Jackie Chan films. It was fun diving back into Fist of Fury Part 2, and then seeing the overlap between some of the elements of New Fist of Fury and Fist of Fury Part 2, which characters came back, which ones didn't, which were actually played by the original actors, and even some of the locations that were shared between the two films, which was kind of crazy too. So it was a lot of fun diving into that. And some people got confused by the title, where I call it New Fist Part 2 Fist. And finally, a few people got the references. They're like, is that one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish? I said, yes. It was supposed to be like Dr. Seuss. I think I was actually going to call it One Fist Part 2 Fist, New Fist, or something like that. But it was just too much. I'm like, New Fist Part 2 Fist. I like that title. I think even James asked me, so is that the final title for this video? It's yes, it is. I know it's stupid as hell, but it's just, it's one of those things that make people subconsciously think, red fish, blue fish, it was dumb fun, basically.
Titling a video is an art form, and that's a good title.
Yeah, there you go. So just getting to dive into a lot of that stuff was a lot of fun. Also, with Tower of Death. I feel like this was the best presentation we've had for that one, because Tower of Death is interesting because it's not a Bruce Lee film. Like, first and foremost, it is not. And even just the story behind it, why it was even called Game of Death 2, is just hilarious, because it was being sold to other countries under that title before it was even shot, I think. Because Nzion was promised, oh, yeah, we have more Game of Death footage, which was true, but they only gave him more Enter the Dragon footage. So It's just like, all right, well, we can't call it Enter the Dragon 2 because that might be an issue. But the interesting thing working on that wasn't that like, oh, hey, we finally have this in HD. It's not an upscale anymore. You know, the HK cut, the Hong Kong cut, which we haven't seen since, you know, the Hong Kong Legends DVD, I think. Because weirdly enough, every release from Forza Star was the export cut. Like, I know it's the longest version, but it's in English. Like, it's a little weird, guys. Like, to be fair, you can't even say Cantonese or Mandarin's technically the original language, since, you know, your main protagonist and antagonist were Korean. So technically, I guess you can't say the Korean cut's the original either. So it's a very international film. Let's put it that way. You have Roy Horan, who I'm not sure which language he was speaking on set. Maybe English, but I know he also spoke Cantonese. I think he spoke Mandarin as well. So, like I said, very international. But the interesting thing, a lot of people hadn't seen this unless they're like hardcore fans, was what I call the non-Enter the Dragon cut, where literally there's, I think, only like one shot that survived from the deleted Enter the Dragon footage. It's literally when he's in the nightclub sitting down asking Angel, well, when she last saw her father. And that's it. Everything else reverts to Big Boss, Fist of Fury, Way the Dragon footage instead of Enter the Dragon. Like, they got away with that one shot probably because it wasn't in Enter the Dragon at all. So, like, all right, the Warner Brothers will never catch these, like, 2 seconds of footage. So it was interesting going back. I actually found a VHS copy of the U.S. release of the film. And because I actually had, like, a taped off a TV version from years ago, but I needed something a little more cohesive, a little more concise. And the funny thing was trying to replicate that cut of the film. So I'm going through like the Big Boss footage, Fist Fury footage, Way the Dragon footage, and trying to like water it down a bit to make it look like it's gone through an optical printer, because they had to like crop the shots to hide whatever outfits Bruce Lee was wearing. Like the Big Boss footage, in the scene that it's used in, he's wearing the blue outfit from Enter the Dragon, or I should say Kim Tai-dong is wearing the outfit, but they're using a Big Boss shot. So rather than seeing like the white of his shirt, it's like cropped to here. So I'm like trying to match it perfectly, but I'm also using a pan and scan version. So I'm trying to like calculate where the head should have been. And it was just like, and how do I make it look a little less restored than everything? It was, so that was another interesting puzzle to put together. But it was definitely more for like archival purposes. The other interesting thing is the fact that the dubbing is a little different in that version of the film in those moments. So I feel like those who are fans of Tower of Death should, you know, give that one a shot for those who have the set. Because, yeah, Tower of Death, once again, not a Bruce Lee film, but it's a fun Yuen Woo-ping choreographed film. I've joked that it's essentially a seasonal film disguised as a Golden Harvest movie. Because, you know, it's directed by the man who basically led seasonal films, Nzion. It's choreographed by the Yuens, including Yuen Woo-ping and the brothers. You have Huang Zhengli as, you know, one of your leads. And, you know, Roy Horan as well, who was a big part of seasonal films. So it feels like a seasonal movie just with Golden Harvest money. So it's a very unique film in that case. And it always amused me that it ended up in so many of the Bruce Lee box sets. You know, even in Criterion. I never would have imagined the day that there would have been a Criterion release of Tower of Death. Or, you know, to be fair, Fearless Hyena Part 2. But here we are. So stranger things have happened. Obviously, Final Game of Death goes without saying, if you have the 3 hours to spare. So it is comprehensive. It is truly comprehensive. Literally every bit of Game of Death footage, including you know the new edit of it all together. You can't really top that. I mean, when James told me he wanted to put all of the Game of Death footage on there, all the dailies footage, I was just in shock. Because any other company that had the rights to it or had access to it back in the day, that was never a thing.
Yep.
Just make the edit, get it out there. You know, with Warrior's Journey, you had all the interviews leading up to it. With Artport, they had like the weird mini biopic thing going on. The funny thing is, I feel like a lot of people haven't seen that part of Bruce Lee and God. They've seen Game of Death Revisited. That's sort of the name that was applied to the Artport edit of Game of Death, or the Game of Death footage. or the Bruce Lee and God version. Because there have been times I've had to clarify to people that 9 times out of 10, when you see Game of Death Revisited, or at least on the Hong Kong Legends DVD, it was the Artport edit. I think some releases have used the name Game of Death Revisited for other extras now, so it gets even more confusing. Neither here nor there. Regardless, I just thought it was amazing that James went the extra mile to actually put literally every bit of Game of Death footage in HD for everybody. And also, not even like format to 235, but like the actual original film vignettes from the actual film. Yeah. So you're literally seeing every bit of visual information, like every frame completely uncropped, because a lot of people don't realize that even with a 235 film, you're slightly cropping your original elements to get rid of the rounded edges, even more so on a hard matte 1.85 movie. Because the funny thing is, like, oh, well, it's a hard matte. They're not going to crop that much. You know, if it's an open matte, then yeah, they're going to crop a lot. No, even the hard matte ones, because I actually got to see, funny enough, the open gate scan for Fist of Legend, and you have to like still compromise a little bit as to what gets cropped, because when you compare that with previous releases in 185, you realize, oh yeah, no, they had to compromise, like kind of put it here, raise it up a little bit, maybe a little down. But yeah, with the Game of Death footage, like full, almost, yeah, I'd say almost like open gate, because you're not seeing like the actual sprockets on there, but you're seeing everything else pretty much, which is still amazing.
That feeling comes across like through this box set. It comes across as James and you and countless other people that were involved in it, and just let's pour everything into this, which it's rare to get that across to the consumers.
Yeah, because, you know, like you said, with Bruce Lee sets, people are like, oh, you know, it's another Bruce Lee set. It's just like, it's kind of unfortunate that people, you know, who are more casual fans might not realize that. And, you know, the other big deal is the fact that this is like the first true 4K release of these movies. Like there have been, there was a previous Japanese 4K release. I think they're re-releasing it now, which has all the other stuff that Arrow licensed to them. And then there's the French 4K releases, but they were all just based on the old masters with like no real new extras as far as I know. But with this, you know, we didn't want to just slap on the 4K masters in 4K and call it a day. You know, we wanted this to feel like the end all be all. And the funny thing is, like, this actually, the original plan was to get this out by the end of 2022. It was actually going to be a November release at the end of 2022. But the irony is the reason why it got delayed was because of the two most popular aspects of the set, the Mandarin cut of the Big Boss and trying to make sure we got the final Game of Death just right. Because the fact of the matter is, I was first made aware of the Big Boss being found, at least the Digibeta version, in June of 2022. It's like, there's no way we're going to get all this done by November. At least not done the way we want it. So, like, once they found the film elements, they're like, all right, we need to push this back into 2023 because we want to get this right. So, you know, they gave time to scan the film elements for the Big Boss, gave us more time to fine-tune everything for Final Game of Death, and it just made for a better package. And so, and also, I think, you know, July of 2023 had more meaning behind it as well. You know, literally 50 years after Bruce's passing that month. So I think it was just meant to happen in a weird way. Like, I'm not a very superstitious person. The word of Michael Scott, I'm a little stitious, but I do think like everything happened for a reason with that set. And I hope that more people do realize like how comprehensive this set is. I mean, to be fair, I think like every version of the box set has sold out at this point. I could be wrong. I think you can only get the individual releases now.
Correct.
Because, you know, that there was the first version with oh my god, I'm blanking on the artist's name. Not Tony Stella. That's the one you have. But the yellow box set, that was the very first version that came out, and that sold out because that was the limited edition version. I think that was only through Arrow. And then the Tony Stella version, that's the one like a month or so later, that one was gone. So then that's why they did the individual releases so soon, because I don't think they realized like how much it was going to sell out. But that's the thing. Like I'm hoping, you know, if it does get a US release in some capacity, that people realize this is sort of the end all be all. Like, I can't imagine much more. If by some slim chance in another 10 or 20 years, we find the rest of the Big Boss footage, if I'm still alive to see that, I mean, I'm going to be 40 next year, so hopefully. But I want to live to see that, damn it. Like, I know at the very least there's more photos of deleted scenes from the Big Boss hiding there. Like, I've been lucky enough to see, like, 5th generation copies of, like, a contact sheet of additional photos of missing footage from the Big Boss. Funny enough, I didn't see them till after I was done working on the set because, of course. But even then, like, the quality was so rough that only hardcore fans like myself could make out what was going on in those photos. Like, oh yeah, no, I think I see the guy with the saw handle in his head. Yeah, right there. Or, one of the bigger ones, funny enough, and I actually talked about this in the Not Quite Biggest Boss, was the even longer version of the final brothel scene where apparently, the people next door can hear Bruce and the other prostitute. And so they're kind of like distracted by that. There's like a really, really, really low res version of that photo making the rounds online if you look hard enough. It's one of those things where they probably didn't take a lot of pictures because they really didn't think anything of it while they were on the set. Right. And so it makes sense. There's like one photo and, the quality is just shit. But I even mentioned in the Not Quite Biggest Boss that there's the photo of Bruce with the one actress who played the pink dress prostitute, and her hair looks a little disheveled. It looks like they're on the balcony of the bungalows where they shot the bedroom scenes. So it's like, I'm pretty sure that's even more evidence that this scene exists or existed. And the funny thing is, even in the Mandarin cut version of the scene that we have, it's very quiet. Like once they're in the bedroom, it's very quiet. It's like, did they just run like room noise on this edit of the film because maybe the soundtrack had other elements to it that they couldn't use for censorship reasons? So like that's another theory I had too. So it's very interesting. So much like any of these films, whether it's Hong Kong films, Italian films, American indie horror films, there's always a chance that something else could be found down the road. But I feel like we're kind of getting to that point where there's probably not much more to find. I feel like, at least with the Golden Harvest stuff, like, can we get like proper Blu-ray releases of his childhood films? Maybe. Could we find the guest spot that Bruce Lee had on that short-lived revival of Blondie? Sure. But, things like that. Or, hey, can we clear up the licensing issues with the Green Hornet and get that on Blu-ray? Right. That'd be great. So there are still things out there. But I think when it comes to these specific films, the Golden Harvest era films, it's going to be hard to really do much more than what Arrow did with this set. I was very flattered to work on this set. And, I can't thank James enough for having me be part of it. Because, a lot of people, thank me for what I did on the set. I'm like, look, James was the magician behind the set. He's the one who, made all the calls or, at least had people make the calls for him to Fort Star to, like, just by some chance, see if they have, this ditch beta of, the Mandarin version of the Big Boss, or, a phone call with La Magie and Reach Rivada, like, oh, hey, we have inner positives of the original 72 footage of Game of Death, So he was like the true magician behind the set. I was more like the fine tuner of the set, if when all is said and done. So, but I'm still flattered whenever I'm kind of pulled into the conversation about the set. I mean, I'm pretty sure I peaked with that. I feel like I can't do much more after that. So it's like, I joke with people at one point. I thought that was actually going to be like the last Blu-ray thing I worked on. And I joked about the fact that, well, I could book in my Blu-ray career with Bruce Lee sets. That'd be a good finish. But, almost a year later, I'm still working on stuff. So,
well, on that note, you've started doing all kinds of Kino stuff with Mike Leader. You've got the Severin box set coming out with the Into the Clones of Druce. Any part of both of those that you'd like to share behind the scenes stuff on?
So with Kino, I feel like I haven't done much with them in a while. It was sort of like a burst of projects that happened all at once. Because Hard Target was like the first one. And that whole thing was very similar to what happened with the first Shout Factory Bruce Lee set. Because I remember when they first announced they were doing the 4K of Hard Target, I was actually trying to get Mike Leader's foot in the door to work on that one because I know, he knows Van Damme. Like he and I have, talked about, him working with him. So I thought, all right, well, Mike Leader would make perfect sense if you don't have anybody else who actually worked on the movie to do a commentary, get Mike Leader. And I tagged him in that. And then he was also saying like, oh, hey, Brandon Bentley would be good to talk about it too. And then Kino finally just went, why don't you both do it? And we're like, all right. So then we had to figure out the logistics behind that because, depending on daylight savings time here in the U.S., he and I could have like a 12 to 13 hour time difference. So trying to schedule that was always kind of tricky. Like normally it'd be like 9 or 10 o'clock at night here. And it'd be like 10 in the morning there. And then we're trying to work out all the remote details and trying to find a way to stream the screener that we have and make sure that we're in sync. So that was always the tricky part. But yeah, somehow we kind of just fell into like a constant loop of just like working on these other titles. Like with the Chuck Norris films, I had the option to do Octagon, Force of One, and Good Guys Wear Black. And I thought to myself, like, all right, so of those three movies, I think Good Guys Wear Black was the one it was probably even longer since I had last seen it. But Octagon and Force One, I was a little more familiar with. So I said to Mike, it's like, why don't you and Arnie Venema do Good Guys Wear Black, and I'll set that one out, and then I'll do these two. And then, funny enough, I think 88 Films did Good Guys Wear Black as well. So I think they were able to like kind of work out both of those. So that was like perfect. And so, we did those two Chuck Norris films, and then we did Ghost Warrior, which very few people have seen. It's a very like overlooked mid 80s. I don't even know what you would call it. It's not a samurai film, but you have an out of time. It's got like elements of Iceman Cometh, but a little more low key, a little more low budget. It's not bad. I think I even said in the commentary there are elements that make it feel more like a pilot for a TV show that wasn't picked up. Yeah. That's the best way I can kind of describe that film. It's not bad, though. It has the actor, I forgot the guy's name, who would go on, probably most infamous online as being Segata Sanshiro for the Sega Saturn promotions in Japan. But we also did, what was it? Heat with Burt Reynolds. That was another one we did. And the funny thing is, there was a time where they actually sent us a list of films that they got the rights to that they were going to be working on soon. And Mike and I both looked at that list, and we just realized some of these would be fun to do, but I feel like there are others who would be more, up right. for the job. Like, I was aware that they had Kindergarten Cop for like a year before they announced it. So I'm just sitting here thinking like, cue all oh man, Criterion didn't get it. Comments on that one. That and the Fletch films, which I think they just announced as well. For those, I thought those would also be fun to do, but I feel like someone who's actually read all the books and can talk about that, I think that would have been perfect. So I stepped away from that because, there are just some things where I don't want to sit and ramble right. if I feel like I can't add anything to the movie. So I kind of stayed back and just kind of let the others do what they did. And, they've picked out a bunch of great people for all these other titles. Nothing really on the horizon with Kino at the moment. I mean, Hard Target was like my target. So like once I did that one, I was already happy because that's another one I had been watching for years. Like I remember when my dad rented, the original R-rated version and then, recorded off of pay-per-view and stuff like that. And then when I went to high school, I got the VHS of the work print cut. And I was a little bummed that, Kino wasn't able to pull that off. But I think part of that was because John Woo said that the unrated international cut was his director's cut. I'm like, all right, well, that kind of ends that argument. But I'd still like to see an actual film scan, not right. just a telesign of the telesign. I always say that wrong. The work print version, but I still have that VHS. So maybe I'll jokingly do my own hybrid cut or reconstruction, just sneak it online one Christmas or something. But it made sense that Wu was like, "Hey, if you want to interview me, you can't put that version on Blu-ray." Or that was the alleged rumor, so that's fair. Like I will give Wu final say. But yeah, the Bruceploitation set. I knew this was in the making for a while. I mean, to be fair, a lot of the fans did because Michael Wirth was always teasing stuff for like ages, and a lot of us were like, "When's this coming out?" And then, of course, he had the documentary that he'd been working on for years as well. And then it slowly dawned on me, okay, wait, he's making the festival rounds before it comes out on physical media because a lot of festivals are really weird about like playing something that's already on physical media or something that people can just watch anywhere already, which makes sense. You don't want to put something in your festival that people will just go, "I'll just watch it at home."
It's the draw,
Yeah, exactly. So that made sense. So once, that was starting to slow down, that's when they announced the set. And at like the 11th hour, I got a message from Michael Wirth asking me if I want to do, part of the commentary for Clones of Bruce Lee. And I found out what he was doing, because if you look at the commentary listing for Clones of Bruce Lee, it makes it look like, I don't know, like 10 of us are in a room, right. just like talking over each other. That's not it at all. This is very much like a, I don't want to say communal commentary, but it's essentially like each of us taking turns and then goes on to the next person. So I do like a 20-minute chunk of the commentary. And so basically what it is, I jokingly refer to it as the short film with Dragon Lee that's in the movie, where it's him dealing with the corrupt film producer. And the funny thing is, when I was studying that, I thought to myself, this seems like this was meant for a different movie. Like it was something else, and then they just gave up. And I found out that was the case. So like as I'm researching for the commentary, I find this out. I'm like, oh, well, it's a good thing I found that out before I started, shooting myself in the foot doing the commentary for this part, because it makes perfect sense. And I even point out that the way he looks in that 20-minute chunk looks different from the rest of the film, because his hair's a little shorter. He's a little, I don't want to say bulkier because it makes him sound fat. He just looks a little more swole up in these scenes. But then we see him in the rest of the film, he's got more of like that shredded look that's a little closer to Bruce's physique. Still bigger than Bruce, but he's a little bigger, but his hair's a little longer. And it's like, okay, yeah, no, it seems like this was meant for something else. And then they kind of shoehorned it into, the clone storyline,
which happens,
and for more stuff. Which is ironic, too, because some of the footage of him in Clones of Bruce Lee, meant for Clones of Bruce Lee, would then be later used in other stuff, like the confusingly titled Big Boss 2. Not Big Boss Part 2, which is also in the set, but Big Boss 2, the title of which makes no sense. I think it was also called Dragon Bruce Lee Part 2, I think. It was released here in the U.S. on VHS as Chinese Goliath. The film has so many titles, I don't think it has an original title. So it's very confusing. So all those Clones films kind of just shared from each other. It was very interesting. And just doing that 20-minute chunk was a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to actually exploring this whole set. I joked with Shrimp Gang that I'm hoping I get the Severn version of the set for my comp, because that's the one that comes with the disc that has Big Boss Part 2. I've heard that movie is most likely a shit burger, but it's the only sequel to The Big Boss. I have to watch it. So, and they filmed at the same location. So it's like, it's right there. So, and the funny thing is, the guy who directed Big Boss Part 2 was the assistant director of The Big Boss. The guy who played the manager in the first movie, who now becomes the new boss in the second film. So it's like, it's got this weird synergy to it. But to this day, I'm still not sure why that one was so, like, lost. Like, I don't know if it was like, unlike the first movie, I don't know if it was like a Hong Kong Thai co-production and there might have been like a weird issue there. But like the only like home release, I think, was like this weird VHS version. I don't know where it was. And like the first half that showed up on YouTube at random like a year or two ago. It's like only 45 minutes long. And then they never put up the second part of the movie. I'm like, what? But it has like burned in like Chinese and English subtitles. So I'm thinking, was this a Hong Kong version of the film? Because the subtitles also don't match the style of the subtitles on the version on the Severn release. So I'm like, and the opening's different too. So it's like, for a movie that's lost, why is there still different versions? And there's a dubbed version out there too that this person in South Africa is hoarding. It's so weird. There's so much like this weird mystery behind this movie that apparently isn't even that great, but we all need to see it.
Right.
It's so bizarre, because the other thing to take into account and why it's actually important to the set, if I'm not mistaken, I am 90% certain that this was the first appearance of Huang Qinlong as Bruce Le. Like, I think this was like his first Bruceploitation role. Like, it's a supporting role. He's basically playing Cheng Chaoan in jail after the events of the first movie. So yeah, allegedly this was like his first Bruce Le role. I don't know if he was actually credited as that or just Huang Qinlong, but it is sort of significant, at least in his filmography. So there's like a lot of important factors to this movie. So it's more like an important footnote than, oh boy, I'm going to watch Big Boss Part 2 again. But it's also amusing because your lead isn't your typical Bruceploitation lead. It's the Five Fingers of Death himself. It's Lo Lie as Cheng Chao Chun, the titular second brother from Tangshan. Because the film has gone through like multiple titles. It actually had a Mandarin theme song of Tangshan Ershong, literally the second brother from Tangshan. They even did a Cantonese version too, Tongsan Yi Heng. So it's like, all right, cool. And then I've read it was also called Tongsan Dai Heng Jokja, which is basically just Big Boss sequel. So because kind of like Police Story, Police Story Part 2, you just have that Jokja, which just means sequel. And in some versions they have both. Like it's almost like a subtitle, like it's Tongsan Yi Heng, Tongsan Dai Heng Jokja, something like that. So you get both on the poster. So that's the other thing too. It had multiple titles, multiple versions, multiple releases, and no home releases aside from like this one that had 10 copies, I guess. It's weird. Really weird, but hey, we're finally getting on Blu-ray. So it's been a long
heavens for Severn.
It's so bizarre. But I love how many people are excited for the set. Like apparently the limited edition's already sold out. The one that has like the extra stuff from Eastern Heroes, I believe. And And yeah, like the response already has been pretty positive because, and, there's been a few people out there who are a little more of like the snide Bruce Lee fans are like, oh, well, this is just the ripoff stuff. I'm not going to watch that. I'm like, get off your high horse. I'm one of the biggest Bruce Lee fans out there. I still love watching stuff like that. It's entertaining. Like I said, one of the first ones I ever saw was Fist of Fury Part 2. It's actually a solid unofficial sequel. I would honestly rather watch Fist of Fury Part 2 over New Fist of Fury, even though that's closer to being an official sequel just because it was directed by Lo Wei. But it's also Jackie before he really got comfortable as a lead. So, and Fist of Fury Part 2, it just has more of a flow from the plot line of the first film. Like, I like the idea that, they just weren't holding their end of the bargain. So then, Chen Zhen's brother comes into town and goes, hey, I heard you kind of screwed over my dead brother's last wishes, so I got to fix that now. Exit the Dragon, Enter the Tiger is a lot of fun. I've jokingly said that's Hollywood land if it were about Bruce Lee instead of Christopher Reeve. Not Christopher Reeve. George Reeves, excuse me.
Right.
The caffeine just never kicked in today. But yeah, Bruce Exploitation's fun. Just don't take it so seriously. It's a lot of fun. And I think this sets like a good starter for a lot of people. There's actually a lot in there that I haven't seen. Because I grew up watching a lot more of the Bruce Lee Ho Chung Tao stuff more than the Bruce Lee Hong Kin Lung stuff. So I have a lot of catching up to do. Because there was a lot. There's a lot of those movies in the 70s.
And it's volume 1, so we'll see.
Yeah. Nothing's been confirmed that there is going to be a volume 2, but there's a lot of positive talk. That's what I'll say at the moment, because I don't know anything for sure. That's certainly in, Severin and Michael Worth's hands. But right now, the dial's pointing more towards that being a strong possibility. And I'm hoping so too, because I do feel like the one thing I wish there's more of the set is more Bruce Lee stuff. I mean, we are getting a solid looking version of Goodbye Bruce Lee, his last game of death, aka New Game of Death. But there's not a lot of Bruce Lee in there. Like, I would love Exit the Dragon, Enter the Tiger, Fist of Fury Part 2. I know that Michael Worth has some of those film elements because he's teased some of them. I might actually need to bug him about Exit the Dragon, Enter the Tiger, because like the one that he's been showing screen caps of, the colors are a little muted, which is the risk you run with certain theatrical prints. There is a good looking HD scan out there it's actually on Amazon Prime. The problem is I'm like 99% certain it was from a UK hack to shreds print. So you might need to do a little bit of Frankensteining of sources to get a pretty looking HD version of Exit the Dragon, Enter the Tiger. I'm hoping that we'll also get like more Mandarin dialogue on a volume 2 as well. Like, there is the Hong Kong version of Exit the Dragon, which is Bruce Lee Star of Stars. Sometimes it's called Bruce Lee Star of All Stars, which actually I have a DVD of that version from like 20 years ago. I think it was one of those like boot legal releases that you could find at Suncoast, which funny enough also had Enter the Game of Death on there. But yeah, they had the Mandarin version of Exit the Dragon on there, which was pretty rare at the time. But yeah, completely uncut. Actually uses a little more of the intro to Shine On You Crazy Diamond by Pink Floyd, because of course, it was they had to use Pink Floyd and Ennio Morricone in their films. So what could possibly go wrong? That was so ironic. I remember people arguing online about The Big Boss, like, oh, well, Pink Floyd stole music from a Bruce Lee movie because Dark Side of the Moon uses music from this 1971 film. I'm like, guys, no, that's not what happened. That's not what happened at all. There was a Cantonese re-release in the 80s. They used the Pink Floyd music. Guys, shit. So, like, this is what happens when people like knee-jerk react to things like that online. Right. But yeah, there's still like a lot of great things coming down the pipeline. I'm just excited that we're getting more into this 4K era now with a lot of movies too. I mean, it's great that we're getting stuff on Blu-ray that, like the Bruceploitation stuff. I joked about the fact that when they were coming out on DVD, 99 times out of 100, they were just VHS rips put onto a disc. Yep. So now we've like bypassed a regular DVD release for most of these to like an actual proper Blu-ray release. Ironically enough, I feel like one of the few that actually had decent DVD releases was New Game of Death, because you had the Chinese version from Celestial and IVL of all people, because that was distributed by Shaw Brothers, which was the weird thing about that one. Wasn't produced by them, but it was distributed. And then the Anchor Bay DVD of the US version, Goodbye Bruce Lee. So it doesn't surprise me that that's one of the better looking ones in the Blu-ray set. But yeah, 9 times out of 10, those DVDs were just better preserved than a VHS. But that's all it was. You were just porting over a VHS copy to a DVD. Like, I remember the other problem was there was that US DVD of Chinese Connection 2, Fist of Fury Part 2. The problem was it was, I think, just copied from the UK DVD, which was still censored at the time. Because this was like circa 1999, 2000. So the nunchucks were still a big no-no. And, they just ported that version here, and yep, all the nunchuck stuff was gone, even though it was the US release. And I have my uncut US VHS from Metro Video that I bought when they were going out of business. So, but yeah, finally getting Blu-rays of films that barely made it past VHS, 4Ks of classics, and, lesser classics to kill with intrigue. But I will say, though, I've actually got to see the new 4K restoration of To Kill with Intrigue. I never imagined I see a Loei era Jackie Chan film looking that good. It's kind of crazy. Like, some of the shots look like it was filmed yesterday. I'm just like, that's kind of nuts. So that's really impressive. There's one that hasn't been announced, but it's been teased, and I think everybody kind of knows what it is, but I'm not going to unofficially announce it. A little bit of digging online, you'll probably find it. It'll probably be announced in a few months. But a few more 4K things coming out this year too. Obviously, on the announced side, the Project A set, despite the delay, it's going to be worth the wait. That's looking great. Like I said, I'm hoping at some point the Bruce Lee set, in some shape or form, gets a 4K release here in the US. Right. We'll see what happens.
And we just got the first title from a Warner deal from Arrow, so maybe they could get Enter in there.
That's the funny thing too. Like, I mentioned that the other day because of the whole Man from U.N.C.L.E. thing. Because when Arrow made their announcements for July, I think it's the July releases. Yeah. I didn't think anything of that because I've never seen Man from U.N.C.L.E. I was aware of the film, didn't realize it was a Warner Brothers title at first because I saw a few people rumbling about that. I'm like, wait, what? And I saw it was a Warner Brothers title, not even a decade old. I'm thinking that's right. That's weird. That's really unusual. That's not like Warner Brothers to license something that new to a boutique label. So it's like, and not to say that they haven't licensed out to other companies before. It's just very rare. Like, Criterion was one of the few that could pull that off, and they did that with the Once Upon a Time in China set, and they managed to pull in 4 and 5 from Warner Brothers. Shout Once on a Blue Moon would do that. Some were a little weirder though, like Exorcist 3, for example, because that's one where it's like, all right, is it Fox or is it Warner Brothers? Mainly because of Morgan Creek. So I think that was sort of like the weird loophole with that. They were able to get a hold of that one rather than Warner Brothers directly. It's licensing's fun. So
never.
I personally have not heard anything from Arrow directly. I actually have sadly not spoken to James in like 2 months. I'm actually hoping to reach back out to him this coming week. We'll see what happens. But I'm hopeful that Warner Brothers will be a little more open to licensing at this point because I feel like they could use the help at the moment. So that's all I'm going to say. But, all these companies would love to work on the Golden Harvest library that they're sitting on. And, at the very least, if they don't want to do anything with it, I would think it'd be amazing if they just sold the Golden Harvest films they have to Fortune Star. That way you have much more of the Golden Harvest library with Fortune Star. You could actually have more, synergistic releases, and then you don't have to start getting licenses from different companies. Because, there are times where box sets won't happen because of that. Like, I knew nothing about the Inspector Wear Skirts films for years. And then when AD Films started working on those, they wanted to do a box set, but because the third one was not owned by Fortune Star, they couldn't do it. Which is, kind of a crazy thing. Some companies don't mind if you intermingle different companies, but others are just like, nope, it's got to be its own release. So it's like, all right, so that's why you had 1, 2, 3, 4 as individual releases, despite the fact literally 75% of that set was Fortune Star. Right. So, but once again, there are times where they might not mind if it is, Enter the Dragon in your Bruce Lee set, just with stipulations. But it is what it is. I'm very hopeful because, much like the John Woo films, there's a lot of stuff that Golden Harvest, how do I put this? Not Golden Harvest, but Warner Brothers is sitting on with the Golden Harvest library. That would be great to get on the Blu-ray or even 4K if possible. It's funny because I thought back in 2018 that the floodgates were going to start to open once they announced the uncut version of Mr. Nice Guy. It wasn't even the Hong Kong version. It was a longer cut than even the Hong Kong version. I think it was actually the Japanese cut, if I'm not mistaken. So we thought, oh, hey, this means we'll get, First Strike uncut, Rumble in the Bronx uncut. Still nothing, which is just stunning. I mean, we got the uncut Drunken Master 2 in the US finally, but that was really more of like a glorified port of what they already did in Japan. And I think that was only because they were waiting out Miramax to completely lose their license here in the US. Because you've noticed that a lot of stuff that Miramax had like latched onto for years has now, become free reign here in the US. Aside from those titles, you also had Iron Monkey get the Shout Factory release, Super Cop, a lot of the Jackie Chan stuff, both Operation Condor / Armor of God films. I'm sure a lot of the fans who weren't too in tune to that were a little confused. What's Armor of God? Oh, you mean Operation Condor 2? I'm like, no. So that's why the titles kind of intermingle, like Armor of God / Operation Condor. And now, of course, the 4Ks of the Project A films are coming out. So yeah, thankfully, a lot of the ones that were like latched onto, I'm assuming for like probably like a 20-year license, are just free reign. As long as you can get the rights to them from Porch Star or wherever else has rights at this point, have at it. But yeah, so it's one of those things where, as a fan, I'm still waiting to see what happens with a lot of things. Like nothing nearly as blockbusting as a Bruce Lee set at the moment that I'm secretly sitting on. But who knows? Now that I've said that, I could hear something next week and then something. Oh, okay, that's going to be a big deal. But I would love to see Arrow or somebody get a hold of those Warner Brothers Golden Harvest films and then go to town. I know everyone would love, like, Pedicab Driver to get a proper Blu-ray release. Like, it had that one lone quickie VOD DVD when Warner Brothers was like, oh, let's try this out. And then they were wondering why it didn't sell well. It's like, well, you didn't really publicize it. And you basically did like a video on demand thing or DVD on demand type of thing. So it was like, no real extras. Like, it's a decent transfer for DVD, but it needs a little more TLC than that. Yeah. It's like with Drunken Master 2. I mean, yeah, great. Uncut version, original Cantonese, but the DCPs playing in theaters are using dub titles. This is not good. Like, I actually saw the Warner Brothers master at Alamo Drafthouse, I think 2 years ago. And I was starting to think, like, I think these are dub titles, like based on the export dub, not the Dimension dub. So I'm like, I think these are dub titles. And then it gets to the first drunken boxing scene where he's supposed to be, announcing all the 8 drunken fairies. And he's not doing that. He's just giving like generic taunts. And I'm sitting in the theater going, yeah, these are definitely dub titles.
Yikes.
Son of a bitch. So yeah, things like that. Like, we can take even the ones that have already been released and improve upon them in some shape or form. Like with Mr. Nice Guy, yes, it's uncut. Yes, we got the Hong Kong trailer, and we got a few extras here and there, but we can have more extras. We can improve the audio. There's more that we can do with these. Just give us the chance, please. It's a win-win situation. Warner Brothers gets more money. The fans get what they want. The distributors get more money. It's a win for everybody. Just
gets preserved. Yeah,
exactly. There's so much there. I mean, allegedly, Warner Archive does 4K scans of everything sitting in their archive. So allegedly, there are like 4K masters of these films already sitting in there. They just don't do anything with them. And it's like, can we please work with you? Please, this would be amazing. Right. But I'm more of an outlier. I mean, yeah, I work with all these companies, but I'm sort of like I don't want to say a gun for hire, but it's a lot of those decisions sadly don't really come down to me. I'm basically just the pest going like, hey, can we do this thing? So, like, I feel like if I had to pick one that's more realistic to happen at this point between the Warner Brothers Golden Harvest films and the Golden Era John Woo films, I'm going to say the Warner Brothers films, just because we know that there's more of a possibility of getting those licensed than, unfortunately, the John Woo films, just because, like I said earlier, even John Woo, even his hands are tied.
Can't do it. Yeah.
If he can't get a hold of them, then like, what luck do we have? So I think it's probably going to be a while before those can be taken care of, because it's really strange. Because if you think about the last official release off the top of my head, I feel like was the Better Tomorrow Blu-ray in Hong Kong in 2016, based on that 4K restoration. And there's been nothing since then. Because that's one that would have been great to try to fix it as well, because that was remixed only, the Rich Avada color grade. So like that would have been great to work on, but it seemed like for some reason after that, that was it. It's
what's crazy is they would sell like gangbusters too. They would.
Absolutely. It's another case of sitting on money. Like, there's so many people that want, the Better Tomorrow trilogy, The Killer, Hard Boiled, Bull in the Head. There's so many that they're sitting on that, we just don't have access to. Like, we would love to work on all of these. And like you said, just money everywhere, especially in all the territories that they could sell to. And the funny thing is, when it comes to like the German Blu-ray companies, there's been like more of a gray area when it comes to licensing.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when a German company puts out one of these titles, somebody's like, "Why they did the thing in Germany? Why can't you do it?" Like, because we don't want to get sued or just completely put out of business because we didn't follow the proper licensing. But for some reason, a lot of the German releases kind of get away with a lot. And that's not to say that those are like unofficial releases. This just more of a gray area. Like even something like the No Retreat, No Surrender films. I would love to see those worked on. I would love to see like Vinegar Syndrome tackle those here in the U.S. I mean, aside from the first one, which of course Kino already did, although even that one could be better. No offense to Kino, but the film elements available at the time, I don't think were up to snuff.
Right.
But the sequels, or pseudo sequels, I should say, they've been getting German releases that are definitely more. They feel more like fan projects, but it's something. Like I actually have the German Blu-ray of No Retreat, No Surrender 3, Blood Brothers, or, that's a film that's gone through multiple titles in Germany alone because since, Karate Tiger 3 was actually Kickboxer, when No Retreat, No Surrender 3 got released in Germany, they had to call it Kickboxer 2. Sure. Yeah, it gets more confusing. But now for the Blu-ray, they kind of retcon that into calling it Karate Tiger 3, Blood Brothers. Sure. So I bought that one. But what's interesting about that one is that I could tell that they used a German master as the base for the transfer. I don't know if it was either like an interpositive or internegative, and it's decent. But then suddenly you'll notice the quality dip in a lot of the action scenes. And I don't know if it was like a 16 millimeter dupe that they used. Some people were like, "Oh, those are VHS inserts." Like, no, it's not VHS. You wouldn't know if it was VHS. Trust me. Like, it's definitely still film. It's just much softer and looks more doopy. Like, it's still probably the best presentation you're going to get on Blu-ray at the moment. But I feel like someone like Vinegar Syndrome would be able to take better care of that, like finding all the proper uncut elements and restoring them and this, that, and the other. But for now, it's the best you're going to do. And now, Shamrock Media, that's the company in Germany that's been putting them out. They actually just put one out for No Retreat, No Surrender 2, or Karate Tiger 2, whatever. Apparently, it's already sold out direct from the German distributor. I'm hoping Diabolic DVD gets a hold of it, because that's actually how I got the third one. And just from the trailer reconstruction that they did for Part 2 on Part 3's disc, it's a little confusing. I could tell they have to do the same thing, where it's like, hey, we had a pretty decent quality base to work off of, but then we had to go to like a doopy other print to kind of reconstruct it and, put in all the stuff that had to be cut from German cinemas. So it's sort of a case of this could be better, but right now this is the best we got. Like even going to the Kino Blu-ray of No Retreat, No Surrender 1, that's kind of like what happened with the U.S. cut that they put on there, because they reconstructed the U.S. cut using the international cuts HD master, and then they took, I don't know what source they used for the U.S. cut, but it definitely looks a little softer for the I call it the Tour of Seattle montage. We actually know who the hell she is, rather than our protagonist just randomly making out with a woman. So that was the weirdest thing about the international cut. It's longer, but it's missing one of the more integral plot points of the film. But no, I would love to see like Vinegar Syndrome do a No Retreat, No Surrender box set. Redo the first film. Give us better selections of 2 and 3, and even throw in King of the Kickboxers and American Challenge, which in some cases have been called No Retreat, No Surrender 4 and 5, even though they're really not. I mean, to be fair, none of them really connect,
right,
plot wise. But I've jokingly said that there's the seasonal Strandberg 7, which were the 7 English language films written by Keith W. Strandberg for seasonal films, because you have those 5, and then you have Super Fights, and then Blood Moon. So, like, I would love to see Vinegar Syndrome just do like a box set of all 7 of those, which would be amazing. But I'm not going to get my hopes up, because once again, licensing's weird with those films. Yep. Film elements are weird with those films. Just seasonal in general has been sadly tricky, because Sony had like this weird worldwide sub-licensing thing with Snake and Eagle Shadow and Drunken Master for like 20 years, which is why like almost every release in the world outside of like at least Hong Kong, maybe Japan too, involved Sony. Whether it was the US releases, UK releases, you had to go through Sony to get these films. But I think that deal ran out, so it might have lapsed back to seasonal. So I don't know how that would work if we wanted to get a 4K of like Snake and Eagle Shadow or Drunken Master at this point. But that's the tricky thing about working on these films. Like, I see so many people whenever any film gets announced, someone says, "Oh, well, why can't we get this movie instead?" It's like, well, let me listen.
Long answer.
Just like pull out the scroll like a naughty list, and just like, I can't do it because no one knows who owns it. No one has the film elements. It's only a cut version.
Yeah,
you name it, we've dealt with it. I kind of mentioned that earlier, but some days I wake up and go, "Hey, do we actually have this movie now or that movie now, or did we find this thing?" There's one person I'm frequently in email contact with. You'll see his alias in a lot of releases, Iron God 2112. I can't remember if it's 2112 or 2112. He didn't get after me when I said that, but it's more like, "Oh yeah, just when you say, just make sure you say the numbers this way." So I think it's 2112. I think he said it's supposed to be like it's a year, but no, he's another like hidden master of getting a lot of these things put together. He's been a huge help on a lot of Blu-rays I've worked on. He's almost like a magician in regards to finding audio sources too. I'm like, "Hey, anybody who's got the VCD version of this movie that's been out of print for like 15 years? Give it a week or two later. Oh yeah, I found a copy." So like, he's got all of his sources. I mean, he's amazing to work with.
Right.
A lot of these titles. So usually I'm kind of informed through him of like what titles have been picked up by like Eureka or 88. Like, even as just a fan, I'm in the dark right now as to like the whole 88 Films teasing Shaw Brothers again. Like, I don't know if you saw that on Friday.
Yeah.
They posted their thing where it was just the Shawscope logo saying in Chinese with English subtitles. I'm like, all right. Did somebody finally get Hong Kong Godfather? Like, that's one that for some reason no one's picked up. Not going to go off into a long tangent about that one. If you haven't seen Hong Kong Godfather, it's an amazing modern Shaw Brothers film that, weirdly enough, only ever got a US DVD release by Funimation of all people. Like, IVL didn't put it out on DVD or VCD in Hong Kong. Like, almost every other celestial Shaw Brothers restoration got a physical release except that and To Kill a Mastermind. Like, those two are always talked about as barely getting any physical release. But yeah, Hong Kong Godfather was a big deal when it came out, even like back in 2010 on DVD, because at the time people were like, yeah, this didn't get a Hong Kong DVD at all. And it was uncut because the only version that people were able to get a hold of prior to that was a bootleg from, I don't know if you remember this. You remember the days of Pan Media and Bonsai Media and Red Sun Media, like the bootleg you find at friggin' FYE.
The bootlegs of bootlegs, yeah.
Yeah, I still see them at like used DVD stores. I'm like, oh my God, it'll never go away. I remember like the biggest thorn in my ass with that company was when I made a custom DVD of Warriors 2 like 20 years ago when I was in college, just for trade. I wasn't trying to sell anything or anything like that. And then lo and behold, months down the road, that dipshit got a hold of my custom DVD and started selling it. Joke's on him. I got to work on 2 official Blu-rays of that movie now. So, came full circle. But that's neither here nor there. To be fair, his bootleg of Hong Kong Godfather was one of the few ways you could see the film prior to its official release.
Right.
But it was from the Taiwanese version of the film, which, unlike some other Taiwanese cuts, didn't have any exclusive footage as far as I remember. It was Mandarin only. This was actually a Cantonese film. And it was severely cut, especially the finale. Like, almost every like bit of bloodletting from the machete attacks, gone. And then seeing it uncut for the first time was like a revelation. There are some moments in there where it does feel like the saw and head scene from The Big Boss. In fact, I think there's like a character who gets whacked in the head with machete that was cut from the Taiwanese version. And it's funny too, because like if you know film enough, you can tell where something was cut because there's like an audio delay. You can see the black splice on the screen for 2 frames. I actually think I still have that version just for shits and giggles. But yeah, like it was fully restored. I'm 90% certain it was an HD restoration too. So I don't know if Celestial's just not licensing that one for some reason. It's really, really weird. Like I said, no Hong Kong DVD or VCD release. Just the one lone US DVD from like almost a decade and a half ago. And I've been begging everyone I've worked with who's put out Shaw Brothers discs, like, please get Hong Kong Father. Yeah. It's funny too, because like Shout Factory has put out like what, 4? Technically 6.
Technically 6 box sets, yeah.
Technically 6. Like there's 4 volumes, but then you have like the 2 themed ones, the Brave Archer and then the T. Long David Chang set. And I thought they would have had it just because of all the ones they snatched up.
Right.
And I remember when I was helping them with the Jackie Chan set, they're like, yeah, we don't have that one. I'm like, then who does? And like even Vinegar Syndrome has teased that they have a few Shaw Brothers films. They announced one of them at the beginning of the year. I forgot the name of it. It's more of like a horror one. I think it's coming out in October. So I have no idea if they have more as well. I wouldn't mind if they put it out. But just somebody like Hong Kong Godfather is amazing. The finale alone is just, it's nuts. Like Beardy, I don't think Beardy Lung Kar-yan had gone that crazy since probably the finale of Thundering Mantis. Like it feels like a modern version of the finale of Thundering Mantis, of just him going completely off the chain, losing his shit. Very nihilistic. It definitely is very much a film directed by Wong Lung-wei. So it's just, I don't know. It's one I've been pushing for somebody to get a hold of. Once again, I don't know if there's just some weird red tape. I don't know if Celestial's just not licensing that one anymore, but it would be a damn shame. But, you know, not even in Germany. Like none of the German companies, they'll just grab whatever they want. Even they haven't put it on anything. Although another one I would like to see that has had a German release is The Delinquent, also known as Street Gangs of Hong Kong, which I've jokingly said was sort of like Jung Ji's precursor to Chinatown Kid. It feels like a test run for Chinatown Kid. It's very similar to that film, but Chinatown Kid definitely has a lot more depth to it and feels more like a Jung Ji film, because a lot of people said that The Delinquent was one of those films where he might have just put his name on it, because usually whenever you see his name and then another name, there's a chance that it was either more like co-directed by him or he kind of just oversaw a few things. Because with From Shantung, for example, that was sort of directed by like 4 people. And then Jung Ji, at the end of the day, kind of put his name on there. I already know the one person I probably pissed off with my incorrect commentary is probably correcting me right now. But from what I've read over the years, there was a lot of like, this person would direct during the day, that person would direct at night. John Woo got his, you know, feet in there too as one of the assistant directors. So it's still a Jung Ji film at the end of the day, regardless. But The Delinquent is one of the ones where it's more like, maybe not. Like it still feels like a Jung Ji film. It still is. It's a very like modern nihilism. It's one that I feel like a lot of people haven't seen compared to the classics like King Boxer and Boxer from Shantung, which I love. Those are 2 of my favorite ones, but The Delinquent's a lot of fun too. That's another one that also just uses whatever Pink Floyd music they feel like using. I think, which one was it? I think it was like Careful with That Axe, Eugene. I think that's one of the ones that they used. But yeah, that's one I'm hoping that someone will snatch up. It would be great to see. I feel like that would be one appropriate for 88 films. I don't know why. I just feel like that's one that they would do. But yeah, we'll see. That's one I would love to work on, because I'm actually sitting on a bunch of media for the US release, Street Gangs of Hong Kong. So that'd be fun to work on. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like going back to what you were saying to begin with, there's still a lot to come. I know about stuff I don't know about. Like I said, I'm hoping that once this one company in question announces this other title, I can finally just ramble endlessly on Twitter about all the stuff I'm doing to try to make sure it's done right, because this is a film where, once again, I'm trying not to give too many clues, but it's one that typically when it's had its video releases on various formats, it's usually in a very truncated format. There was one release that was a little longer, and then there was another release that was longer as well. None of them have been completely uncut. This is the longest cut that's ever been on video. It's almost like a Big Boss Mandarin cut situation. But the weird thing is, this uncut version seemingly is completely from the original camera negative for this film in question, which I did not expect. Like, it looks gorgeous. Like, all the stuff previously missing looks gorgeous. Like, it looks like OCN. I could be wrong, but it looks great. Like I said, the only issues we're having with it is that we didn't have access to the original Chinese opening titles, because for the re-release cut, the Chinese opening titles were completely different. Like, the stylization, both the English and the Chinese, is completely different. So I can't just rip those from there and then plop them into the longer cut. I actually have to go to like this old VHS bootleg version and try to reconstruct it from that. And that's why I made the joke on Twitter that my eyes are just burning trying to watch this old bootleg version and then reconstruct them to look within the ballpark of the original credits. And then, trying to get the different sources to complete the Mandarin track. It was just a weird anomaly that, like, we have a complete English track, but not Mandarin? That doesn't make sense, guys. And so now I'm trying to use like every restoration trick I can think of to make it sound better and try and make it streamlined. So I'm going to make a big deal about it once it's finally announced. So, but it's one that the old school fans will really get a kick out of. No horrible.
Amazing.
But it's starring a very familiar face, but I had to make the joke online when I started referencing it on Twitter that, like, no, we didn't suddenly find the remaining missing footage of the Big Boss. So don't get your hopes up. That's not what it is. That's not what it is. Just a year after the set came out. No, that's not
right.
I wish, but it's not.
Remastered, brand new.
There's a lot of overlap. I'll say that much, but it's not the big boss. It'll make sense when it's announced, but I'm working very closely with the company in question to make sure we get this done right, because I'm hoping that it's still going according to plan. There was that film, and then there was a double feature. We're potentially doing it as a double feature, either that or like 2 individual films. And I kind of put my foot down and said, all right, we need to switch this around, because the double feature I can probably knock out in a couple weeks. I need more time with this one movie to make sure we get it right, because I don't want to put it out and then people are like, oh, well, they messed this up, or it's missing this thing, just like we were talking about earlier. I want to make sure I can spend more time on this one movie than what we need for these 2 films, because the 2 films, a lot of it's already been covered. That, we have good elements for, the visuals, the audio. That's not going to be that crazy. They don't have multiple cuts. They're just 1 cut per movie. So we're good there. But this one, I want to make sure I get done right and take my time with it and not rush it. So I'm hoping we're still going to that plan. Otherwise, I'm going to be like pulling my hair out at 3 a.m. on a weeknight to make sure I get everything done right. So, but I digress.
all of the links for Brandon will be in the description below to find out what that announcement is. I'm sure we'll be hearing through social media all the big deals about it. Again, like there's obviously you can't buy the box set because it's long out of print, but the individual releases of the Bruce Lee stuff is all available. The clones of Bruce Lee through Severin. You mentioned something being sold out. That, just so you know, and so everybody knows, it's the limited pack. The box set itself is not different. It's all the same. Discs and everything.
I think it's the version that has like the little mask thing in the magazine. So it's basically like a lot of extra stuff outside of the box.
Correct.
Both the Severin version and the standard version from the other sites. Those are all still up for pre-order.
The Severin version, though, does have a bonus disc for everybody listening. So make sure you buy for
2 extra
Severin
movies.
Yes, so that's a big deal. Kino stuff up for sale. We'll hear about this mystery release coming up soon. Got anything else to let everybody know before we call it a day?
Not really. I mean, there's, like I said, more coming from seemingly everybody. So keep an eye out on the usual suspects that I work with. Probably getting announced. Well, like I said, not much in the way of Arrow on my end, but hopefully that'll change in the near future. But 88, Eureka, and even Shout Factory. Keep an eye out on those guys in 2024. There's much more to sneak up on you.
Well, I kind of want to call this Brandon Bentley Volume 1 and force you to come back, because you obviously know a lot of shit. So
as long as I ramble, you need to split it up in the multiple volumes.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Brandon, thanks again for doing this, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, we'll cover all the subgenres. So join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Thank you for listening to the Disconnected Podcast. There's one big thing that you could do to help the show, and that is to leave a rating and review on the podcast service of your choice. Thank you.